2002 meeting of the Humboldt County Planning Commission, and as you can see, we are back in real session, and it's great to see everybody's faces here. So as usual, we are also doing this using Zoom, and you can call in that way. Go to the county website, and you can see all the different options that you have. And with that, let's see, that's went through all that. I will call this meeting to order and ask everybody to join me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pardon me?
I always heard you really loud.
All right, thank you. Laura, can we have a roll call, please?
Alan Bongio,
Here.
Noah Levy,
Here.
Brian Mitchell,
Present.
Mike Newman, Melanie McCaver,
Here.
Peggy O'Neill,
Here.
Thomas Smolder,
Here.
All right, thank you, Laura. We have 6 commissioners, so we have a quorum, and Mike is on his way, so we'll just keep moving on. With that, Director, do we have any agenda modifications?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. The first modification that we'd like to call to the Commission's attention is relative to item number 7 that's on the consent calendar. We're going to ask that that be pulled from the consent calendar and continued to a date uncertain.
That's the BCR,
BCRD LLC, yes.
continued to a date uncertain.
And the next item that we would like to modify is item H1 under public hearings. That's the Blocksburg Family Farms. We would also like to have that continued to a date uncertain. That's under public hearings.
Blocksburg Family Farms, all right.
Yes.
Both to a date uncertain.
Yes.
Certain. And that's it?
That's it.
All right.
There are 2 rather large supplementals on the IS, but those are both related to one of the items being continued.
Okay. So why don't we just get some housekeeping done and just continue get a motion to continue those 2 items to a date uncertain. Item number, I believe it was number 7 and H1.
So moved. Second.
All right, we have a motion, a second. Laura, roll call vote. Oh, that's right.
Actually, we do.
We do?
We don't have the voting mechanism here to do that.
Correct.
But we can say all opposed say aye, all opposed say nay. That's how we did it before in the meeting, right?
No.
On a roll call vote.
Yeah, there were only certain things that were a roll call.
Well.
So however the chair wants to do it.
Brian and Noah was the second.
We always did roll call because we always did roll call.
Okay, all right.
I know, it was 2 years ago.
My understanding,
2 years
since we're
ago. My memory is
virtual,
going
we
shy.
have to do it as a roll call vote, but
I think that would be safer.
okay, let's just do a roll call vote. We're gonna have some hitches that we're gonna work through, so Laura, a roll call vote, please. No problem.
Yeah, I was
Oh, cool. Oh.
Chair?
Yes.
Since we're back in person and things are a little awkward, you should take public comment on items that are continued, or being continued, because these are public hearings, and the Brown Act does require that you allow people to at least comment on the continuance.
Okay. So before we'll take a vote on this, then, I will open this up for public comment on the two items that are being continued. Is there anybody who wishes to comment on this? I gotta get,
Alan, I'm unmuted, and I'm only commenting on the continuation, not on the projects themselves. I want to thank John Ford for taking the time earlier in the day to work with me and come to some understanding on both of those items. Strongly support your continuation of both of those items, and this is going to speed this meeting up. So I hope that we can move fast. I will be pulling two items. Don't need staff reports, and I hope to zip through them and get some quick determinations on 5 minutes on each of those. So let's see if we can set a record for this kind of meeting today and move as quickly as we can. Thank you for my opportunity to speak.
all right. Thank you, Kent. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on either of these items? All right. Seeing none, I'll close the public comment, and I'll bring it back to have a vote. So, Laura, a roll call vote if you're ready now.
Thomas Smolder,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
All right. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Laura. All right. So with that, we'll go back to the consent agenda, and I'll go through each item as we always do. And if anybody wishes to have that item pulled, either speak up or raise your hand if you're zoomed in with us. And so the first item.
Mr. Chairman, do we have a public comment for non-agenda items?
Yes, we do, and I did that out of order, didn't I?
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clarify, there are some members in attendance today or on the Zoom meeting that wish to comment on the other business, the report on the old Arcata Road project, which is not a public hearing. So would it be appropriate for them to comment under non-agenda items or when we get down to that item?
Well, I would think that when we get to that item would be the best, but Director, you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
It's not a public hearing, but it is something that we'll receive public comment on.
All right. Thank you, and thank you for catching me on the public comment on non-agenda items. So now I will open up the public comment once again for non-agendized items, anything that is not on tonight's agenda. And I see 5288. Go ahead.
Briefly here, earlier in the meeting, I want to caution you folks that sometimes you have open mics before the meeting that comes out over the radio, or out over the phones or whatever system there. You may wish to moderate some comments that I heard during that period. I'm not going to go into specifics. We have enough problems in Humboldt County with Rex Bone allegedly flipping off the auditor controller from the supervisor chambers, and we don't need anything. So just you might want to watch your chit chat before the meeting, just heads up on that. I did wish to make comment a little bit here, very briefly. We have a general situation overall through the county. We have a problem with interfaces between county and city jurisdictions. And I just want to make mention that I really appreciate, when those things are moderated to the point to the satisfaction where the county is represented to the maximum it can on different things. So I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you for my chance to comment on non-agendized items. Look forward to moving this meeting, like I said, rather rapidly through. Let's see if we can do that today, and I will attempt to accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on non-agendized items? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period, and now we will move on to consent agenda items. So I will go through each item and ask if there is anybody who wishes to have this item pulled. And the first item is review and approval of the February 3rd, 2022 action summary. Is there anybody who wishes to have this item pulled? Seeing none, that will stay on consent. Item number 2, review and approval of the February 17th, 2022 action summary. Anybody who wishes to have this pulled? Seeing none, that will stay on the consent. Item number 3, 5 Star Cali LLC conditional use permit in the Densmo area. I see a hand up, so we will pull that item. All right. Item number 4, Mdrv Realty Holdings LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Densmo or Mad River area. Anybody wish to have this one pulled? I see a hand up, so this one will be pulled. Item number 5, Lost Coast Collective Incorporated conditional use permit and special permit in the Ettersburg area. Is there anybody who? Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. All right. Thank you. The next one is Vase Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Salmon Creek area. And I see that one is pulled. 5, 2. All right. Brings us to item number 7, which was already continued. So that concludes everything on the consent agenda. So it appears to me that we would be looking for a motion on items 1, 2, well, 5 has already been, so we're good. So I think it's items 1 and 2.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the balance of the consent calendar that hasn't been pulled or continued, items 1 and 2.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion on that? Okay. Laura, vote on that, please. Yeah. Brian and Melanie. This is what I was talking about. They were having problems with yesterday.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Melanie McGaver,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes.
All right. Motion carries unanimous 7-0. All right. So this will bring us to items pulled from the consent agenda. And the first item was item number 3, 5 Star Cali LLC conditional use permit in the Densmore area. So take a staff report.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So this project, 11181 5 Star Cali in the Densmore area. I'm sorry, this is a typo here, Benbow. It's in the Densmore area. Project is 17,100 square feet of existing cultivation, 9,600 square feet of which is mixed light, and 8 greenhouses, and 7,500 square feet is outdoor full sun, which is proposed to be relocated to the west away from the house and 2 aesthetic ponds. And nursery space is proposed to be 7% of the cultivation amount. Processing would be off-site. And the parcel is developed with a single house, yurt, carport, and some storage containers. Irrigation water is entirely sourced from an existing rainwater catchment pond, and there's an additional 28,000 gallons of water storage. And there's 2 additional ponds on the site, so 3 ponds total, but the other ponds are used only for emergency fire protection and are aesthetic ponds. Water usage is equal to the amount in the rainwater catchment pond. And right now, the applicant is using a 45 kilowatt generator and 1 or more small portable generators. And there is 2,500 gallons of diesel stored on the property. But the project is conditioned to develop an alternative energy system in order to reduce or eliminate reliance on that generator within 5 years. And that condition is copied here on the next slide. They're to develop this energy system, alternative energy system, which is capable of supplying 80% of the energy demands. And that would be annual energy demands for all mixed light, interior lights, fans, dehumidifiers, et cetera. And this plan would be submitted along with monitoring of energy usage, illustrating that the alternative power sources are capable of meeting the energy demands of the project. Upon an analysis of the setbacks and buffers on the property, the planner, being me, Jordan with ICF Contracting Planner, looking at Google Earth imagery, there's strong evidence that there is mixed light greenhouses that are less than 50 feet setback. And so we did levy this project with a condition to have a qualified professional map that water course and classify it, and if necessary, to relocate one of those greenhouses or 2 outside of that SMA buffer, should it be needed. And because the greenhouses might be located, or 2 of the greenhouses might be relocated, and because the outdoor cultivation has been proposed to be relocated, the project is also conditioned to conduct a botanical survey to make sure that the receiving site is not in any sort of sensitive natural community. It would be an open grassland, and there is a chance that that could be a sensitive community, so that would need to be demonstrated before any ground disturbance could occur or any grading permits, whether retroactive or existing or proposed, would be issued. Here's the site plan, but you have that in your package. You can see the location of the ponds quite clearly in blue, and this square area is where the proposed cultivation would be relocated to. And there's 2 greenhouses in the southwest that are in question based on Google Earth analysis. And I would like to bring to the Planning Commission's attention that there were comments received yesterday from 2 neighbors that stated that they would hope that the project could somehow be compelled to participate in a road maintenance agreement. And I'm not sure if the planning commissioners have had a chance to see that letter. I could read it out loud if that would facilitate, because since it came in yesterday, I'm not sure it made into the supplemental materials.
Why don't you go ahead and do that?
The first author requested that the Humboldt County Planning Commission not approve the conditional uses permit for this project until the following impacts are properly mitigated. The project executive summary states that Bear Creek Road is maintained by an informal neighborhood road association. This is a true statement confirming that maintenance of the only available road from Highway 36 to the mountaintop and other unpaved access roads results from donations, volunteer time, and equipment, primarily from a few longtime residents. Year to year, excuse me, There are no guarantees of roadway funding or volunteer efforts, nor are there any mechanisms in place to require funds from the primary roadway users. Commercial operations. We, the author of this email, who have owned property above Densmore for almost 40 years and have witnessed significant increased vehicular use of Bear Creek Road, majority being non-resident delivery trucks and two-wheel drive passenger vehicles associated with both legal and illegal growing operations. These vehicles cause the overwhelming majority of damage to unpaved Bear Creek Road and other associated roads. The donations and volunteer efforts by a few are not sufficient to keep up with roadway use by non-residents and commercial operations, nor was this area subdivided, planned, and designed for this level of roadway use. Additionally, it is my understanding that the parcel in question has not actively contributed funds for roadway maintenance. We have further concerns, including of overdraft of groundwater. Numerous parcels in the neighborhood have shared wells, proper fuel storage, spill containment, and protections of groundwater quality like pollution, generator noise, etc. We request that the conditional use permit be denied until costs associated with roadway maintenance are equitably shared by this and other commercial enterprises operating in the mountain areas accessed by Bear Creek Road, and confirmation that the other listed concerns are properly addressed and actively monitored. And I just pulled up the access route map here on the screen and a couple of snapshots of the road taken from one of the two road evaluation reports that were provided in the packet. And I believe the project's agent is on the call as well.
All right. So are you done with your presentation then?
Yes, I'm sorry. That
Okay.
concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Let's have, if Britt wants to speak now, he can, but I'd prefer that he waited till if any questions come up, that he could answer everything at once. But if you'd like to speak, Mr. Massaro, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Baggio. I'm a woman, but
Oh,
thank
I'm
you.
sorry. I'm so sorry. Boy, it's been.
No worries.
Already.
I would just like to say that, as well as the agent that I am on this project, I'm also a direct neighbor of the project as well. I only help Humboldt County legacy cultivators, and my father as well has cultivated for 40 years in Humboldt County. I only surround myself with people with the most environmental superior practices. This applicant actually was part of the road association, as Bear Creek Road has developed over the years with multiple cultivators coming in from out of the state. We did 2 years ago successfully crowdfund and bring together some funds to get road improvements for Bear Creek. The road has absolutely never looked better. We did put a board at the front of our road with all of the applicants who have contributed to this road association, and Five Star Cali was one of the entities that was able to contribute to those improvements of the road. I thank you all for your time listening to me, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Does anybody on the commission have questions for Ms. Mazzaro? All right. Any for staff? I'm going to go to public next. I was just asking if anybody had any questions for staff before I open it to public. You do, Mike? Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Chair Bongio. My question for staff is, how many other legal grows are on this road, and how many of them are part of this loose road association? Do we have a list of the road association participants?
I do not have access to those data.
Okay.
Does any other staff member have anything on that?
Cliff was looking like he might, but
Sure. Through the chair, I'm looking at our GIS right now. I would say just approximately there are anywhere between 5 and 8 other cannabis applications, including 3 that have been approved in the vicinity. It's kind of hard to tell how many are actually on that road. But because there is more than 3, I think it's clear to say that there's more than 3. The ordinance 2.0 requirements for a road maintenance association will apply, regardless of whether that's made a condition of approval here. That is one of the few retroactive provisions of ordinance 2.0. So they would need to join the road maintenance association if they're not already part of that. And so we do have some tools available to implement that.
So continuing on that question, then, so it would be needed to have a formal road maintenance association for this and the rest of the other projects? The current
Correct.
ones that are there, that are already permitted, and then, of course, the new to be permitted?
Correct. So as part of our annual inspections, that would be something we would look at to see if they have developed or joined the Road Maintenance Association. And then that could be utilized to do any improvements that might be necessary through any of the road evaluations that are prepared for any of those projects.
If I may quickly follow up, thank you. That was clarifying. I just want to make sure I understood what you said. Based on the number of applicants or projects approved on this road, it's automatic under the ordinance that this project would have to join the Road Maintenance Association. In other words, we don't need to make that a separate condition of approval? Is that what you said?
That's my take on it. The ordinance does apply retroactively there.
Okay.
So that would apply to the ones that have already been approved, whether that was made a condition of approval or not.
Okay.
So I just am going back on what you just said, Commissioner Levy, and what I was asking. So there is no road association currently, road maintenance association. Is that correct, staff?
Through the chair, I'm going to defer to Jordan. I think that the public commenter that he read in had mentioned that there is a road maintenance association.
I thought it
And
was said loose, informal. There is
Okay.
no maintenance, no regular formal one. So that would need to be a condition, I believe, in my book.
I think it's safe to include it as a condition.
Okay.
Ordinance 2.0, I think, would still require that they form one, but it, helps to add a condition of approval that's specific.
Thank you.
All right. Melanie, you had a question, and then Thomas.
Yes, a question related to the maps that you started providing. I've noticed that the roads are not on the maps, which makes it really difficult to evaluate the effect in terms of roads or multiple effects. In addition to that, the approved projects are with a little line, the design is a little different. Post-approval monitoring, case complete and approved, all look the same on the map. If you could address some of the items in the legend and maybe choose something that's a little bit more distinguishable. I'd also like to see the enhanced post-approval monitoring as a separate feature on the map. And then in terms of the colors for everything else, typically in GIS, what we want is a gradation of the same color for like things. So if you could go from very light pink to fuchsia, for example, I would recommend for projects that have been suspended and in anything in that category, it be in reds. They're a little bit more intuitive. So right now it's kind of a sea of different non-intuitive colors and patterns. And there are a few things missing, namely the roads, the enhanced post-approval monitoring, and some of the smaller water features.
Okay.
If I could suggest that maybe we would have a discussion on this at a later time, not as part of a
Yeah.
specific project, because those requests really are something the commission needs to vote on. It's not one commissioner to give direction like that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can bring that up at the end of the meeting, but I did feel it was relevant to this particular project because we are discussing the impacts in terms of the road, and we aren't able to see the roads on the map.
Okay. We probably will have some time that we could bring that up at the end. I think we're gonna, with as many items that got pulled, so hopefully anyhow. Thomas, you had a question.
So to piggyback on that, I'd feel really uncomfortable having that discussion because members of the public that may be concerned about that, it's not agendized, so it'd be nice, I'd appreciate an agendized item to bring that up, just so members of the public that may be concerned about roadmaps would have the opportunity to speak. But what I originally had my hand up for is to staff. In the report, it said 2,500 gallons of fuel storage was on site, and I don't see a condition of approval, any of the COAs to enroll in Humboldt County Environmental Health, the CUPA program. And I think it's like any more than 500 gallons of fuel storage, you have to enroll in that. So are they currently already enrolled in environmental health? I guess that's my question.
Would that be for you, Jordan, or?
I'll take a shot at that.
Go ahead, Rick.
So we don't have to write a condition for everything that's already required by ordinance, and they are required to do that by ordinance. That's not something that's discretionary, that's mandatory.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right. Any other questions for staff before we open this up for public comment? All right, see. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Just going back to that road maintenance agreement, since there is no formal one, is that on staff to help facilitate and get that done?
I don't.
Because otherwise, it may take forever.
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily on staff to do that. However, we have helped in some instances, and the Public Works Department has some template materials that they've been able to provide to people to do that.
And that would go out to the existing permitted grows as well as the to-be permitted grows and any neighbors along that road? Is that what happens? I'm just unfamiliar with how that would form up.
So we would provide some templates for the legal documents, to establish that, and any information necessary for them to be able to communicate with their neighbors, such as mailing addresses, ownership information. That's the sort of assistance that we could provide. It would be on the applicant or any of the applicants to, facilitate that communication with their neighbors and show the county that they have taken those steps. And so typically what we would look for would be that there's minutes from the meeting, that they've established a secretary and a treasurer and that sort of thing.
So is it the driving force on doing this, the permitted and the to be permitted right now? So the two permitted ones and then the to be permitted one, such as this one, if that's a condition to drive that? Or is that going to be an accumulation of the others to be permitted as well as the drivers for it?
Sure, that's a good question. The way that the language in Ordinance 2.0 reads is that commercial cannabis applications under Ordinance 2.0 would have to show that they've consented to join or helped establish the Road Maintenance Association. And then each existing permittees under the first ordinance would need to also demonstrate that upon each annual inspection when the permit comes up for renewal, basically. Does that answer that question?
Kinda. So it'll be the two already permitted grows?
Those would probably be the first two that we would inform have that requirement, upon the annual inspection.
And then if that's part of this and it passes and part of the requirement, it would be actually all three?
Correct.
Okay.
And then just to add to that, any ordinance 2.0 applications, as they would come in, that would be something we would inform them of as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for staff before I open it up for public comment? Okay. I guess, okay. So now I'm going to open up public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the commission. So the first caller is 5288.
Ken Sawatsky, I pulled this one and I wasn't going to have a staff report. Thank you for having it. So many concerns were raised after the fact. This is extremely disconcerting. You just had comments that apparently you have language in your thing which would say they had to have this road agreement, and yet you have two projects that went forward without having that happen. In other words, staff is not following through. I think it would be totally appropriate for staff to go through all existing permits that you have there and see how many of the other ones didn't follow the policy they were required to. I strongly support things like this always being a condition. There's nothing wrong with having extra conditions in there. That's the clarity that apparently two people didn't understand already, and I don't know how many hundreds of people through the process haven't understood this and other ones. I would not follow staff's thing. This is in here, but it's not being followed through. It's not being enforced, and that's really disconcerting. I think you folks should be disconcerted about that a little bit too. I strongly support Melanie's request for any information she makes, because if I was sitting there and I didn't have the information required to make a decision, then the correct process is to abstain from voting. And if she feels she doesn't have the information, roads or whatever, cumulative impacts, mapping in a way she can understand these things, then I would abstain. It's your job and staff's job to provide you those things so you can make a totally informed decision. I know Mr. Mulder will probably disagree with me, but one of the main reasons I pulled this one was regarding the generator use. And it's very, it's apparently sometime in the future, and it's years down the road and not 2025 and afterwards, we're going to go down to 80% on generator. This is a fine example of why mixed light should not be out in these areas at all. You shouldn't have mixed light. I don't care if it's Mr. Mulder or anybody else. It's just an example of generator goes. Of course, you have one large generator and a couple other little ones. Those weren't really adjusted other than a couple little ones. That's why we're so concerned about here, because there doesn't seem to be the actual policies and procedures under these ordinances you've developed actually coming to fruition that protect the environment. So that's one of my biggest concerns is the generator thing. And I think you could easily make a finding that generators do not belong out there in any of these situations, according to me, and Mr. Mulder, again, will totally disagree with this. But because of the trend of California trying to get rid of all combustion engines as soon as they can, it's in the public's interest and health, safety, and welfare, and in the environment to go ahead and eliminate these generator grows in these areas entirely. And I know HumMap tried to bring this forward back many times ago, had litigation, but it didn't seem to help. So unfortunately, a lot of things are dropping. These road maintenance things are important, and yet they're not being enforced, obviously, by testimony. The other thing, I would hope that according to the testimony of the one letter, there are illegal grows in this area, and I would hope that code enforcement would be eye in the sky on this thing tomorrow, and those would be remediated, or it would come to determination there are no illegal grows in this particular area. That's part of our concern also. So thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for pulling this, and thanks for the staff report. I did not pull item number 4. I will see what the staff report is, I guess, if you have one. On item number 6, I do not require a staff report, but if you folks feel it's necessary to go for it, that's fine. Thank you for my opportunity to speak.
All right. Thank you. Next caller is Britt Massaro.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak again. As one of those two projects approved on this road, I am one of them. I think it's very important to understand that it's very hard to get a community together to put a road association together, especially when half your community is traditional growers and half your community is trying to come into the legal marketplace. I think there's a lot of expectation that's just unrealistic from the public that really needs to be heard by this planning commission. Also, I live out in Dinsmore 10 months out of the year as an approved cultivator, as this cultivator's neighbor. And sometimes it's just impossible to not have a generator going, whether it's to pump your water or to get heat in the wintertime. It's just unrealistic. So I 100% support renewable energy. This applicant has promised to transition within 4 years, not 5 years, like the staff report says. And I do think that maybe some county council and help needs to come into play in order to develop these road associations more, because we are at a community divide at this moment in time with getting these 1.0 applications to compliance compared to 2.0s coming in. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. This applicant is more than willing to comply for this following year. We did not cultivate last year until we got a full permit as is. And just to reach Thomas's concern, we are meeting with Mr. Verbeck from Coupa tomorrow morning to get our generator into compliance and help to transition to non-renewable energy. Thank you again.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment, and I'm going to bring it back to the commission. Go ahead, Peggy.
I was a member of a road association. It's not that complicated. I mean, if you have a template that's available to you, then somebody takes the initiative who has a license and is required to have one, takes the initiative to write it up. You have a meeting, everybody comes together, and in our case, we all funded annually an amount of money into a bank account for the association, and would have meetings every couple of years when we had enough money to do something. And it's not that hard. If you're required to do it as a part of your permit, then you better make it a priority.
Thank you, Peggy. Thomas?
So, as far as the road associations, I've seen some other challenges with people getting road associations, and I've actually seen a lot of people just try to the neighbors don't respond, and they end up just doing it themselves. But this one's to staff, and I think we already heard this. There was a public comment concerned about all these different COAs we need to add, but just to clarify with staff, if it's in the ordinance and it's a rule, part of the post-approval team's going to flush that out in the post-monitoring. Is that correct or incorrect?
That is correct.
Thank you. And then I found that there's a map on page 82 in the staff report that kind of helps. I don't know if you saw that, to help kind of get a general idea of where this project is and how it's located. So just informational.
All right, thank you, Thomas. Any other questions?
Yeah, just to address the map, it doesn't show all of the other farms and projects. That's the issue.
I'm going to comment, seeing nobody else. Maybe Bob Bronkel could chime in on this item, because it seems to me it would be his department that would be overseeing road maintenance associations. I know that that's who does it when it's done on any other project. But my experience has been that associations are put together generally by a engineer or somebody with qualifications to put together a association to come up with what the fees are going to be based on what the costs are to maintain that road. You know, every road's different, lengths, culverts, you know, we go on and on about all the things. But it seems to me, if that's a requirement, then we should be asking that a certified person or a qualified person is maybe the better word to use. My experience has been it's an engineer, so that's probably where I would be leaning, is to have an engineer set up the road association. How you go and make people that you've already given a pass to for the projects that didn't have to become a part of an association, I'm not sure how you're going to force that issue, but I guess that's for the county to figure out, and not for us to figure out. But that's my thoughts. Brian, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, on requirement 10, it says the applicant shall work toward and then what they're going to work toward. But that doesn't really mean they have to do it by a certain date. We heard in the public testimony that they said they do it in 4 years. I think we need to say the applicant shall develop alternative sources of energy within or by this date. And if that's 12/31, 2026, then that's what it should be. But I think this language is too loose and won't get necessarily the cooperation or the outcome that we are giving when we compromise and not make it be 100% and not make it be nothing. You will do it, not you're going to try.
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I'd have to be in agreement with Brian on that. I'd like to, take out work towards and shall develop and the date.
Okay. Thomas?
Just to clarify, with staff, I'm usually against these type of conditions, but if I heard the public testimony correctly, this was something the applicant was willing to do or offered to do. Is that correct or incorrect?
That's correct, Thomas.
Thank you.
And did they agree to 4 years or 5 years, like the person on the phone call said?
I would defer to the agent, Brittany Massaro, that was on the call, that it was 4. I do not recall precisely what was agreed to, but I think it was a demonstration of their eagerness to comply with that.
I'm willing to open it back up to let her answer that question, but I don't want to go back and forth, so I'm going to do it this one time.
Just a question.
Britt, if you're there, go ahead and answer Commissioner Mitchell's question.
Thank you for opening comment. We did agree to 4 years.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So where do we want to go with this?
I agree with the suggestions made by Commissioner Mitchell.
I do as well.
Well,
And the additional condition to form up the Road Maintenance Association. That has to be in there. That was missing.
so I'm going to ask a question on the Road Maintenance Association. Are you saying if we're going to put that condition in that we're saying that before this project can be approved that they have to form a road association, or?
It has to be in the process of, and I think we would need to put a date certain on that as well.
Okay. So maybe you could put that in your motion.
Well, I'm trying to think what a good date would be. Have to defer to staff and or the director to kind of get an idea of what kind of a time frame would be appropriate for this.
So this is a request for a permit for existing cultivation.
So it's a 1.0.
Well, it could be 1.0 or 2.0.
Okay.
But it also is then with something we call a provisional permit, meaning they're going to enter into a compliance agreement to bring all the portions of the site into compliance that are currently out of compliance. Gives them 1 year to develop a plan, 1 year to implement the plan. So maybe those guidelines within the existing ordinance would be good for formation of the Road Maintenance Association, that they come up with a plan for the Road Maintenance Association by the end of year 1, and then have the Road Maintenance Association in place at the end of year 2.
That sounds perfectly acceptable to me. The
Yes,
rest
they
of the
still have
commission.
to do a botanical assessment, for example.
So we don't want to rewrite the book. I think just keeping it as it goes here with a 1 year to develop and then the second year, at the end of the second year, to have it made.
Go ahead, Brian.
Can I make a motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would move that we find that the commission has considered the addendum to the adopted mitigated negative declaration for the commercial medical marijuana land use ordinance as described by section 15164 of the state California Environmental Quality Act guidelines, make all the required findings for approval of the conditional use permit, and adopt the resolution approving the 5 Star Cali LLC conditional use permit as recommended by staff, subject to the recommended conditions with the 2 modifications that we've been describing. One is that on the energy, I believe that's number E10, that it will be, the wording will be, the applicant shall create, shall develop, and then by 4 years of this date.
And
the second one was adding the requirement, an additional requirement for the Road Maintenance Association with the timeline that would dovetail with the compliance agreement.
And I would second that. Would we put the end of the year for 2026 4 years, or what's the usual on that, Director?
It would be good to have 4 years from a certain date, or just identify what that 4 years is. So 4 years from today would be March 3rd of 2026.
That'd be fine. All right.
What if it was appealed or anything like that? I'd have a hard time, hard setting from today. Just throwing that out there.
And that's why I was thinking maybe the end of the year, 12/31/2026.
Well, if the applicant is the one saying they're going to do it, why would they appeal what they've already?
I don't see the point of that.
Okay. Whatever the date is right now, March 3rd.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll ask Laura for a roll call vote, please.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes.
Melanie McGaver,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Thank you, Laura. Motion carries unanimous. All right, so that brings us on to item number 6. Vase Ray Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Salmon Creek area. And if I heard Kent, who pulled it, he did not have to have a full staff report, so
Chair, perhaps I'm confused, but didn't we just do item 3, and wasn't item 4 also
I
pulled?
thought it was, I apologize if I missed one, but I thought, oh, you're right. I thought it was that we had, it was one that you had to a certain date. I apologize. So, correction, we're on item number 4, Mdrv Realty Holdings LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Densmo Mad River area. All right. So we'll take a staff report. Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Megan Acevedo, and I am the assigned planner for Mdrv Realty Holdings, LLC. Mdrv Realty Holdings is applying for a conditional use permit and 3 special permits located on a parcel in the Densmo Mad River area. Here is an aerial image of the location for Mdrv Realty Holdings and its proximity to Densmo and Mad River. The project is located northeast from Densmo and northwest from Mad River. The project is accessed from 8 Mile Ridge Road, from County Line Creek Road, from off of Highway 36. 8 Mile Ridge Road and County Line Creek Road are both non-county maintained roads. The applicant has submitted a road evaluation report for the access roads with photos designating the access road as being developed to the equivalent of a Category 4 road standard. The subject parcel is 40 acres and has a zoning of forest recreation. The applicant is applying for a conditional use permit to permit 14,450 square feet of existing outdoor and 3,600 square feet of existing mixed light cannabis cultivation with a 1,480 square foot ancillary nursery. Water is sourced from a spring diversion on site under Water Rights Certificate H100730, and the applicant is applying for a special permit to allow the continued use of the spring diversion. The applicant estimates using approximately 150,000 gallons of water annually, 7.68 gallons per square foot per year. There is a total of 90,000 gallons of existing water storage on site, and 63,000 gallons is proposed for a total of 153,000 gallons. 2 employees will be used for project activities. Drying and curing will occur on site, and trimming will occur off-site at a licensed processing facility. The project is powered by 2 generators and is conditioned to transition to 100% renewable energy source by 2026. An additional special permit is being requested for the relocation and restoration of a historic cultivation area within a streamside management area. And another special permit is requested to reduce the setback to public lands, the 6 Rivers National Forest, to approximately 497 feet, shown on the site plan. All cultivation areas are shown in green. The spring diversion is shown with a blue starburst, and the generator sheds are shown with red starbursts. Public comment was received in the form of a phone call and in an email. Some major concerns that were addressed by the commenter was the use of 8 Mile Ridge Road between 2 adjacent properties owned and operated by the applicant, stated to be completely separate, and stated that workers utilize the road through 3 adjacent properties multiple times a day to access one property from the other, resulting in damage of the road with the use of heavy equipment and increased traffic. The commenter also stated that cars are often parked on 8 Mile Ridge Road, blocking access through the road. They also mentioned concerns about the use of County Line Creek Road, which is an unpaved dirt road, resulting in effects to neighbors with dust, noise, road deterioration, and impacts to water quality of the adjacent Mad River. The commenter also has concerns about the applicant's estimated water usage and existing water storage on site, stating that the applicant likely uses more than the 150,000 gallons of water claimed to be used. Safety concerns were also mentioned in regards to previous car crashes on the access road, generator usage and fire hazard, inadequate fire department access to the site, as well as safety concerns regarding past theft issues. The commenter also claimed that light pollution occurs on the subject property. Photos of the road and a previous car crash site were included in the public comment. The public commenter requested to remain anonymous. This concludes my presentation, and myself and staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thomas, you have a question?
So, I apologize earlier, I just opened, if my eyebrows were raising, I'd opened the email that actually was for this project, and I was kind of mind blown. Not, that was on the last, before the last project, but I'm confused, because in the anonymous letter, it says employees drive constantly through the property. It sounds like high rates of speed, but then we're saying there's only 2 employees for this project, so I guess what would be the ramifications if there was a site inspection or evidence from neighboring parcels if there was more than 2 employees at this project?
So if a project is not complying with their operations plan and we find that they're grossly out of character with that, then that could result in revocation of the permit.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Mine is
Sorry.
just ignorance, and I wanted the presenter to describe this conditional water permit, and when you apply for one, is it for a specific purpose? Is it commercial, domestic? I don't really understand. And then they said something about they were applying for a special permit. Could you just give me more clarity on that?
Are you asking staff that question? Megan, can you answer that question, Megan?
So the applicant has obtained a water right with the State Water Board, allowing the use of the on-site spring diversion for fire protection and for irrigation purposes. Our ordinance also requires that for any work for a diversion within a streamside management area, that requires a special permit.
Thank you, Peggy. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Thomas.
I'm noticing right now that they're having to have more storage implemented because they're operating off a diversion. So does that mean that, has this project been operating, and if so, does that mean they've been technically diverting outside of the times if their storage doesn't meet their needs? Or maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe I should read some more again.
According to the information in the operations plan, 150,000 gallons is estimated annually, and they do not have the required storage on site currently to abide by a forbearance period. Part of the conditioning of the project is for them to include water storage in order to abide by that forbearance period.
And they've been operating under an IP currently, is that correct or incorrect?
That is correct.
Have there been any fines associated from Department of Fish and Wildlife or State Water Board? Because the math is saying they've been utilizing water outside of the diversion period.
No violations with CDFW that I'm aware of.
All right. Any other questions before I open up public comment? All right, seeing none, I'm going to open up the public comment, and the first caller is Mdrv. *6 to unmute. Are you there? Okay, I'll go on to caller 2 and maybe come back to the first caller. So this next caller is 5288.
I would just like to reiterate the pathway that Commissioner Mulder was going down there. Clearly, there are violations. The math just doesn't add up. The other concern that hasn't been addressed here, and according to testimony prior, I'm sure there is a condition on here that they have a road maintenance agreement. Or if not, it should be on here. That's why this appears to not being enforced. And of course, that road maintenance agreement most likely will be with whoever has the property. Is that the federal government that they have to have a road maintenance agreement with if they're accessing federal property, going through federal property? That should be definitely a thing that's required here as far as the road maintenance agreement, according to the last thing. So that's one of the things. I didn't pull this one, and I appreciate the person wanting to be anonymous on this because, well, it's the world in which we live out there, and some people are not good players. And that's a sign of maybe something seriously wrong here. But I'm Kent Sawatsky, and I'm objecting to this, and I highly recommend as a condition that you again have a road maintenance agreement formed prior to any cultivation because of the lack of following guidelines and using water, obviously, and don't know what other violations are going on out there. I think this is another one. Is this another mixed light in the middle of somewhere where it doesn't belong? I'm not sure because I didn't really pay that much attention to this one. But those are concerns that, need to be addressed on this project. That watershed is a very critical watershed in which it is. I noticed, according to the map you had, the topography directly above there seems to be rather, I don't know, possibly slide prone. So I don't know if the area is at all fitting to have any kind of a commercial venture of this in this area. So there are concerns. I recommend that this project be continued and brought back at a future date when you can address these concerns in a informed manner. And when you have the participant or the applicant here to answer questions, because I think there should be quite a few questions for that person. Thank you for my opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next caller is Mdrv again. We'll try. *6 to unmute. All right, I'll move on to public 6367.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, Andrew. This is Andrew.
Okay.
Are you reading me?
Yes.
Okay. The Zoom wasn't not allowing the unmute to happen, so I had to call from another phone.
Okay.
So I'm here making you aware of that problem. Are you there?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Main concerns are all the relevant ones: the adjacent to public lands, the dark skies, the layout. As far as access and dust and noise, the decibels are tenfold the 50 decibels at tenfold the distance of 100 feet to a tree line. I'm surrounded by them all day. Their activity is in my place, and I'm not opposed to them, but if they have egress through me to operate one and they come and they go, that's one thing. But if they come and go all day long and all night long, if they forget gas or they forget their cigarettes or they're just buzzing around constantly on someone else's property in order to operate their business. And to get a permit, it implies permission. And I don't give them permission. They leave all my gates open, and unfortunately, I came up missing everything I've ever put there in 30 years. And we had an agreement that they could try to make amends for that, but they stopped taking my calls and email and text. So further, moving on, even currently the water is being pulled right out of the middle of my property to a lower neighbor to supply them indirectly. And considering the drought that we're in, this operation is going to suck up any water anywhere on the mountain because that's what they're doing. And they pull all of the water off of a Forest Service spring that the prior owner somehow was able to get a permit for without me being notified or my other neighbors, they were able to get the forced service spring that hydrologically feeds downhill into other people's springs on their property, and it was an immediate decline of 70%. So instead of 1,000 gallons overflowing your tank and going back into the water course from a private spring on my place, it would be down to maybe 200 in a day. And that's because they take and need all water they can get their hands on.
30.
So, moving forward,
You have
the
30
lights,
seconds.
The noise, the wrecks on the road are almost like a carnival. You know, you show up and it's, oh, look at that guy, he's down upside down in the river, in the Mad River, and he's missing. And then, oh, just this weekend, there was another Chevy down into the trees, smashed into a tree off the road just below their property.
Okay, your time's running out. Your time is
Well-
up. Thank you. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and bring this back to the commission. So, Brian, go ahead.
I guess I just have a basic question. The map doesn't show it as being two different sites with a neighbor in between. So are we talking about them having two illegal grows currently and they're trying to legalize one of them, but they'll still be cultivating on the one that isn't permitted? Is that what's happening here?
I can answer the question. The applicant owns and operates two adjacent properties, has stated that they are completely separate, and so we reviewed them as two separate projects. The northern parcel is a zone, it's a special permit, and was supposed to go to the zoning administrator hearing this morning. The applicant really wanted these two projects to be reviewed separately, and ensured me that there were no shared activities between the two parcels. But the road that accesses the two parcels together runs through three adjacent parcels for almost about a mile.
If I could share the screen, I can show you what Ms. Acevedo's talking about.
Please do.
So these are the two parcels right here. And you can see that there's a hairpin turn accessing the subject site, which is here. And then the road goes out across other parcels and comes back to another hairpin turn here. This is the other parcel here. So rather than just having a direct access between two parcels, it goes out and across two other parcels.
All right. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm just wondering if the operations are apparently shared to the employees, how haven't we identified this as having cumulative impacts of having two employees here and two employees there, but they're using them all on all sites? And a lot of the time, these requirements rely on us to have faith that the applicant is going to be a good actor, and we have evidence to the contrary. So it makes me very uncomfortable to move forward at this juncture.
Thomas?
So, I've seen projects where there's adjacent parcels, but they don't affect other neighbors or other partial owners, so I've never really seen those complaints come forward, but thank you for sharing that map, Director Ford, because I'm seeing, I mean, it sounds like in their operations plan, they're saying it's completely different projects, but if they're sharing resources from one site to another, if they were adjacent and weren't impacting another partial, I wouldn't really see that as a possible issue. But is there something we need to evaluate here if their impacts by shared resources are impacting other partial owners? That's what I'm having a hard time with, especially hearing the speed and the gates open and that kind of thing.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Yes, I'd like to ask staff if they could pull up the so-called planning commissioner map and show us where the two grows in question are.
I'm not sure what map you're talking about, planning commission map?
I'll bring it up.
It's the map that we're provided that lacks a lot of detail. If you right-click, you can select the pan, the hand, if that's what you're looking for.
What would you like me to do?
If you could just zoom in to these two grows in question.
Is there a specific question you have for the
Yeah,
director or something?
so if you could just highlight which of the two we're talking about here?
The southern one that is yellow within that box.
Okay, and are any of the other ones also under this applicant?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, just looking at that map, so how many other grows or proposed grows still coming or have been permitted are right around this area here?
If you could pull it up again, you could see there on the map.
Five.
And notice what we can't see is how many are on each road, because there are no roads on this map.
it is a good point. It'd be a lot easier to, but that's for another discussion. I think we'll have that at the end of the meeting and try and get something agendized to discuss that.
Just to
Go ahead.
piggyback on, there are no roads on this map, but I remember whenever the discussion was had in the past, the discussion was to not have roads on there for safety reasons. Oh, I mean, I'll look through the archives and pull it up, but I do remember that's the reason.
I did actually analyze from my desktop here, and there are 2 approved projects off of County Line Creek Road. 2 other projects that are not currently cultivating off of County Line Creek Road, so 4 projects total, and 1 project that is currently cultivating under an interim permit off of 8 Mile Ridge Road.
There are about 30, I think, 30 projects there in that cluster.
The black ones are code enforcement in that area, so that means they aren't doing anything.
Okay. Well, what's the thoughts of the commission on this project?
My thoughts range from allowing the applicant to come in and rebut what the evidence that's been presented against them, or straight out deny it for lack of being able to make all the findings. That it's not in the public's best, health, safety, and welfare, and the public's best interest.
Okay. Thomas?
If it is, I see condition 11, even moving forward, that they have to show the amount of water storage before the diversion, otherwise they'll have to get their curtailment in. But if this project's postponed to a date uncertain or something like that for a chance of rebuttal, I would hope that possibly maybe their IP cultivation area was, their cultivation area reduced if they don't have the amount of water storage to justify that they aren't illegally diverting. Those ones kind of concern me, and I believe, I could be wrong, but if you get caught illegally diverting, that you immediately have your state license revoked, but I could be wrong.
I think you're correct.
I'm in agreement that I'm uncomfortable with going forward with this at this point. I would need more information with what has been brought forward from the public and what we've heard. So I would like to continue it to a date uncertain to bring forward with more information.
Go ahead, Thomas.
I'd be willing to second that, and one other of my notes for staff is on page 103, they claim that they only have 1 vehicle trip per day from one parcel to the other. And on page 35, it said they only had 46,000 gallons of water storage, so I kept bouncing around.
Would you be comfortable with that, Director, if we asked to have this brought back?
Yes, I would. In fact, one of the things I was going to recommend that the commission may want to consider is to bring both applications back to the commission simultaneously with explanations of how they interrelate, how the traffic between the 2 sites function, why there is public concern about the traffic. And this is new information that came up for us just this week, actually this morning. So we weren't expecting this, frankly.
Okay.
Thank you for that, because I think we had an agreement a few months ago that we would see all projects adjacent to each other from the same applicant at the same time.
That is correct, and we do that. The one nuance here is that these 2 projects have no interrelated infrastructure other than the road. And so there's no shared water, there's no nothing shared on the site. And that is why the decision was made to process them separately, but understand that when there is a shared road, that really is shared infrastructure.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you. So,
would-
so going forward, I think that, we would all, so most of us would agree that we would like to add that language to our previous request, that anything shared would trigger that protocol. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would amend my motion to the data uncertain and bring both of these items together.
I would be comfortable as a seconder with that amendment, and the reason I'd be comfortable is because the road impacts other people. If it was two adjacent parcels with an interconnected road where didn't affect other neighbors and didn't have shared resources, I'd be different, but if their resources as far as roadway affects other community members, that's why I agree with that.
Yeah, so I think that for in the future, I think that's what we need to look at there. If there is a roadway that connects the two parcels, but it goes through other people's parcels, that would trigger bringing both together. If there was a direct roadway and everything was separate, then I don't think we would need to see both together if they don't want it, if there's no shared resources.
Well, our previous agreement was that, exactly that we wanted to see all projects that were submitted by the same applicant on adjacent properties together, because we were seeing multiple projects, and I believe actually you might have seconded that.
Well, I was in agreement with that, but I thought that it was when there was shared resources between the two that we brought that forward.
Well,
I have a different concern, and that's the diversion of water and how it impacts the existing people that live there. I don't know enough about the permits to understand that when you apply for one and you say, well, I just need this for irrigation, and then it turns out that irrigation seriously impacts your neighbors. I don't know what their redress is and whether or not they have an opportunity to go back and say, there's been impacts. I wasn't aware that, because I think that the neighbor indicated that they weren't contacted about this permit. So not knowing enough about the irrigation permits that you receive, was it limited or the special permit? I don't know enough about it, but I would be concerned anytime commercial use was going to impact the neighbors. And I don't know if they're all growers and, there's not enough water to go around for all of them, or if it's their domestic use that's being impacted, and what their legal rights are to address that.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Neill. We will look into that. That is not a county permit, that is a state permit, but we will investigate that.
all right, thank you. Go ahead, Thomas.
Commissioner O'Neill, I think I may have heard one of the public speakers differently. I think the reason for that drawdown was because of the time of year the diversion was taking place, but I may have misheard the public commenter. So I think it might have been outside the normal diversionary times.
Yeah, that's if you're diverting during the winter months, it shouldn't impact your neighbors. The fact that it is impacting them in a time that's supposed to be the more rainy season is kind of concerning.
Yes.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Just to clarify, Commissioner Newman, the previous agreement that we had with the staff was that where there were any shared resources, we would see those 2 or sometimes 3 or 4 applications all at once together. And this one slipped through because I guess it was overlooked that the road was a shared resource. And so what we were just clarifying now was that roads would also trigger us seeing those together.
Clarification, if it goes through other parcels that are not part of the applicants. So if it's affecting somebody else, not just the shared road directly?
No, what we had requested actually, because we had, I think, several months there where we received multiple applications from the same applicant on this, adjacent parcels. And several commissioners had, called that out and said, hey, we'd really like to see all of these together all at once, because in many cases, they were relying on, for example, the same water supply or other resources. And so we had made that request, and I mean, it's been 2 years since we've been in this room, so I'm not sure when that was now, but it was, I think, in the last year.
That sounds about right.
Well, perhaps we can have it researched and take a look at it, just to be certain there, but I'm kind of along that same line too with you. So, but I'm fuzzy in the brain on that.
Go ahead, Brian.
I guess I just want to point out that I think you are being too generous. I think it would have been obvious that there were more shared resources had the application been honest. When it says point blank that there are no shared employees and there would be one vehicle trip per day, and we have evidence that says that that is, you know, dozens fold, you know, under exaggerated. So this should, it goes back to trust for me, and I'm going to really have to be convinced that we're going to not be having these same problems after we look at them together.
Well, I agree. It was an, you know, fairly egregious oversight, and I hope that the assurance we just received from the director that we will in the future see all of these together is the case.
All right. Thomas.
So I would hope that before there's direction of any shared parcels that don't impact neighbors, that is clarified through looking through the archives before there's moving forward with that, because I don't remember hearing what I'm hearing Commissioner McCaver say, the shared resources, a shared road, if you have adjacent parcels and there's a road that does not impact other property owners, that's not necessarily a shared resource, but shared water. I remember following, because it's hard for me to differentiate between when I was actually on the commission, between like following the commission, because I was doing it religiously. So I would hope that there's some study done in the archives beforehand.
Well, perhaps given that the director agreed that we did have that agreement and that this was an example of an oversight, or, you know, an example of not following the agreement we have, the director could give an overview of their protocol in terms of what happens when they come across multiple applications on adjacent parcels from the same applicant.
Go ahead.
If I could, I really object to the characterization of this as an oversight. It was not. An intentional decision was made because the parcels functioned separately, like two completely different applications by different owners. Commissioner Mitchell hit the nail on the head. The operations plan identifies they operate separately. And so if there was an untruthful, that's something we need to look at. If there was deceitful information that was submitted as part of the application, that's certainly something that needs to be evaluated. But it was not an oversight. We thought intentionally about this and saw that they operated separately. They're not, neither one is reliant upon the other at all.
I meant the road, the shared road.
But the road is something that is new, because the road is there. Both parcels gain access from the road. It doesn't matter whether the application or the applicant is the same on both parcels or not. The road is there. It's not a shared resource other than it provides access to, it looks like about 12 different parcels. And so if you've got two different applications that are not sharing water, they're not sharing resources, they are simply using a common road, that was not part of the discussion before.
Okay, but now it is.
You have asked for that tonight, yes.
Okay, and if you could just go over what exactly it is that you do, and will now include looking at roads, just, you know, for some of the commissioners who may not remember.
Well, what I'm hearing tonight is that there is a bit of a schism within the commission in terms of what the commission actually wants us to do. Because previously, the clear direction was that where there is shared resources, where one parcel is dependent upon the other or provides some service or some infrastructure to the other, that those are clearly processed together. Okay? That's not the case here. The problem is, in this particular case, in order to get from one parcel to another, they access a road that goes through other parcels. And up until this morning, nobody had brought up, to the staff at least, that these two parcels actually have common employees that are traversing that road all day long. That's not what's in the operations plan. That's not what we were evaluating. So that's new information.
So employees are considered a shared resource also? Okay.
I guess you could say that, yes.
All right.
And so going forward, how will you determine whether these shared resources exist? I mean, how will you prevent what we have here right now today from happening again?
Well, I think the thing that there's two different scenarios relative to a road that I would offer that I think we will follow these protocols in the future. Is that if there are two parcels that have a common road, even if it's internal to the two parcels, but one or both parcels are reliant upon that road, that's a shared resource. We're going to bring that forward together. If there is a parcel such as this, where the road goes out and goes around any other parcel and affects other parcels, we're going to bring those together, which basically means that if there's any abutting parcels, we're going to bring them together.
Okay, that's great. I think that was what the understanding was originally.
Thank you. Thomas, go ahead.
So I'm just looking from a staff perspective, and I mean, if they were following their operations plan and, you know, just doing one vehicle trip, they could share a resource, in my opinion. They could go from one parcel and then make one vehicle trip to the next parcel and then only make one vehicle trip back to the next parcel. I don't think they would be outside of their operations plan. And the evidence that we came forward this morning was outside of that operations plan. So I think that's where the shared resource comes from. As long as you're not back and forth sharing resources, I think it would be fine if they just did the one vehicle trip from one place to another, but it's the back and forth. That's where the having to evaluate it together, I see.
Yeah, that's what the question is here. We didn't take a position on any of the other things you just mentioned. We just agreed that we wanted to evaluate those applications together, not in separate meetings, and then we have to go back and say, you know, what did that application look like 2 weeks ago, or last month, or 3 months ago?
Well, I believe the director succinctly put the conditions forward here that we're going to be following here in the future. So I think that puts that right to rest there as to what will be happening in the future.
So, somewhere a ways back, we had a motion and a second to continue this to a date uncertain.
And bring both permits forward.
Yes.
Together.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? All right, Laura, roll call vote, please.
Brian Mitchell,
No.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder, Peggy O'Neill,
No.
All right. Looks like the motion carries 5-2. We're at 7:40 right now, so before we start another project, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll restart the meeting.
Recording Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everybody. So we're now moving on to item number 6, which is the Vase Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Salmon Creek area. And we'll take a staff report. Go ahead, mate. Is there a staff report coming, or? Is that? Okay. Yeah, and
Megan, are you doing this?
Hi, yes, I'm doing this presentation. I cannot hear Commissioner Bongio. So
Okay.
I'm sorry if I'm delaying the
My mic is on, so I apologize.
I can hear you now. Thank you. I
Been
was
on the whole
unable to
time.
hear you previously. But thank you. And yes, I will share my screen.
Well, do we need a staff report?
Well, I don't even see the person I believe pulled this, but is,
It's been pulled, but just an abbreviated staff report, I think.
yeah, okay. 5228, do you want the staff report on this? Just ask the question.
I don't require a staff report unless something comes up and you guys have further information you request based upon my request.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll just open this up for public comment, I guess, is the only thing, and then bring it back to the commission. So I'll open it up for public comment. 5288, you're the first caller.
Okay, I got muted and I'm unmuted now, so we're back at you. Technology. My concern on here was a little bit of a lack of specificity and a concern, again, continually having these large ancillary uses, which a lot of times have a lot of power used on them. Is this, I'm trying to go through here, it just says cultivation, but does this use electricity? I mean, is that what kind of cultivation? It just says existing. So maybe that's further in the staff report. That's always nice to have what kind of cultivation, unless I'm not seeing it in here. We have estimated water usage, seems to be plenty, taking care of the water, good on them for that one. But then we come down here, power is provided by 3 generators. And of course, it doesn't say in here, again, this is a very truncated explanation. It should say in here if those are to be phased out or if there's a thing. And I think they should be just plain and simply eliminated in these particular areas. There's a Salmon Creek area, 3 generators. So that's one of my biggest concerns here. Is you've got this the 3 generators, and here it should say they're converted to solar. I'd like to see it not permitted at all, but you know me, I'm going to get overruled on that one as far as anything that has to do with generators out there. Should be a thing of our past on these kind of things. And so that's my main question. What kind of cultivation is it? If it is a mixed light or something that uses a lot of power, definitely that should just plain and simply go away as far as generators go. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. That's all.
All right. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, I will close the public comment. I will bring this back to the commission. So is there any questions the commission has for staff or any thoughts on this one?
maybe just for the public caller, on, you'll see under the finding project description, it is 15,900 square foot mixed light cultivation and outdoor cultivation utilizing light deprivation techniques. Is that helpful?
All right. Thank you, Melanie. So what would the commission like to do with this one? Go ahead, Director.
If I could, I think one of the things that the commenter is expressing concern about is in the second paragraph of the executive summary. It identifies that at this time there are no long-term plans to switch to grid or solar power, as it is cost prohibitive. The operation is secured behind lock gates with someone typically on site at all times. So they plan to continue to use and have asked for permission to continue to use generators and not to either an alternative power source or grid power.
Okay, Thomas. Thank you, Director.
So I did see that, but I also did see that there's an existing residence on site. So, and I've asked this question before, but I believe that there is no generator requirements for a residence, you know, as long as it meets certain thresholds. So I would be comfortable with this project as long as it's power, you know, they weren't using generators that were over the size that could be used for that residence without any restrictions. If their energy uses are within that, which I kind of read that it was, I had no qualms with it if there's residents on site. So that's why I'm good with the project as it is.
Okay.
I would prefer to see some effort towards getting off of renewable, or going to renewable energy. It's not fair to all of the projects that we've required in the past to just say, oh, you don't want to do it? Okay, never mind. I feel like giving 4 or 5 years to develop their power plan and to get down to that 80% of your power throughout the year is going to be an alternative energy source other than diesel or whatever. It could be some other solar array. It could be another type of alternative energy. Peggy's talked a lot about other forms that she's used in the past. So that's what I would be comfortable with passing.
Okay. Melanie?
I think that's most consistent with what we have been recommending for other projects. And also note that the generators are not, that we don't have an idea of how large they are or how often they're used.
All right, Thomas?
So I'm going to go down this generator drum again. Is there any restrictions for residents out in the hills to run is there any restrictions for a generator to run 24/7, 365? Is there any restrictions on that?
No.
So are there any restrictions for that generator to appropriate power towards a cultivation if it doesn't go over whatever the energy usage is, then that's where I'm leaning towards, because if a generator can run 24/7, 365 for a residence, why can't they appropriate some of that generator use to the cultivation activities?
Do you want to answer that, Director?
Well, I think that's the policy issue that or the public health and safety issue that's being confronted and discussed as part of this application. There are not currently regulations that affect the use of generators relative to residential uses. That is true. The question is whether or not that same generator would run as much or at the same level with providing lights for cannabis cultivation, for additional ancillary uses such as propagation and or drying and or processing. And so while you're right, the fact of the matter is there is no requirement for residential use. the fact of the matter is a discretionary use. And so the thing the Planning Commission needs to weigh is what are the impacts associated with that generator use, and does it pose a danger to the public health and safety and welfare?
Okay. So with that on generator use, I believe we went all the way through ordinance 1.0 and all the way through ordinance 2.0 and left that generator use still allowed. Is that correct or incorrect?
I would not completely agree with that.
Okay.
I would say that when 1.0 was crafted, the anticipation is that most cultivation sites would be somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 square feet. And then we started getting applications for mixed light in the neighborhood of 20,000 square feet to an acre. And that really was not entirely contemplated in the ordinance. When we worked on 2.0, that is why when we started to see a lot of applications that were for generators, 2.0 does have provisions that are pretty restrictive for new cultivation relative to generators. It requires renewable energy for new, and then does have some provision for existing, but still requires that 80% of the power come from a renewable source.
Okay. I'm still good where I'm at with the generators, so.
Well, I'm having trouble trying to figure out why we're talking about residences here, because this is an application for a commercial marijuana grow, not for a residence. And so why are we talking about whether there's a residence on it or not? If there is a residence, they could, and they've been using a generator, that's fine. But we're talking about the generators being used for the cannabis. So to use the fact that there's a residence there, and it doesn't make any sense to me as an argument as to whether we should be approving a cannabis grow or not.
Okay.
I mean, they're not the same thing. This is a commercial cannabis project, not a residential house project.
But if the generator could, my argument was if the generator could run 24/7 for the residents, why couldn't it appropriate power from that generator use that's unregulated? So it's fine. I can get laughed at and all that kind of stuff. I'm totally fine.
I'm not laughing at you,
It's not
Thomas.
you. It's not you, Chair. So it's good.
I just don't understand. It's not apples to apples. If they were coming for a residential project here, it wasn't a cannabis project, we'd be having that discussion if they could use the generator. Or we may not even be having that discussion. But in the cannabis world, we have the discussion every time a project comes up. So I don't see it being the residents playing into this.
It's outside the purview of what we're doing. I mean, we are evaluating a project. We're not evaluating residential activities. It's like if somebody said, you know, I do all my art at night and I have to use a really bright light. And so, you know, I have night sky violations, if you want to call them that, but they're a resident. You know, it's not the same thing.
We can simply agree to disagree, and the vote will go the way it's going to go. But I will be respectful towards all my fellow commissioners when we do that.
Thank you, Thomas. Noah, you good? Okay. Anybody else have? Who started to say something? I didn't hear it. Okay.
I just think we should be consistent, and in the past, we've required an energy plan and to convert to renewable, and I think we should do this here. There's 3 generators. There's not enough information for me to evaluate what size they are, how often they're used, and that would come out of an energy plan. You need usually 1 generator to run a house, but I feel like we should be consistent with this applicant. We've been pretty consistent. We even went to the Board of Supervisors to see if we were going overboard. And we're responding, I think, to a lot of community concern about fires in those areas. And, you know, you could be in a house and say, well, I'm there, but people leave their homes. So I think we just need to be consistent. And I would agree that an energy plan that's developed, you know, it can include wind, you know, which isn't as expensive as solar. It can be hydro, but a plan. And a move towards not using so many generators. I do understand you need a generator if you're out in the middle of nowhere and that you're probably going to run it 12 months out of the year if you're living there or need it for any purpose. But to move towards renewables, at least in those months when you can use them, I think we should require that.
So I'd be prepared to make a motion, and I'd like to add, and if I say my standard 80% within 5 years renewable or alternative energy, if I say that, Director Ford, is that sufficient enough for you to understand what I'm asking for?
Yes, we will use the condition that was used earlier today.
Yes. And can you please also add sufficient findings such as that we are currently in another year of like a record series of droughts in California. The fire dangers are a concern and have been unprecedented the last number of years. And having the more commercial activities running off of generators outdoors, the more greenhouse gas emissions there are. So we have 3 or 4 concerns that affect the public health, safety, and welfare. So if you can make sure we don't mess this one up.
Thank you. Yeah, no, those are well put findings. We will add those.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion by Brian to that effect. Do we have a second to that?
I'll second that.
I don't know. I'm going to say no, it was quicker, but, all right. Go ahead, Thomas.
So I'll be the odd man out here, odd person out. But to support the fire hazard findings, I believe you can actually engineer and build a building that takes care of that fire safety. So I would support a condition allowing the generator to be operational with the fire safety building. But obviously, that's probably not how the vote's going to go down, but I'm just explaining myself ahead of time.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on this? Go ahead, Mike.
I'm kind of along the lines of Commissioner Mulder, but I'm also listening to what is being said on the renewable energy. I understand that this is, now is this a 2.0 or a 1.0?
1.0.
It's a what?
This is a 1.0.
1.0. So back when it was developed, as the director stated, that wasn't a concern at the time, and generator use was not really talked about in there. In the recent past that we've been doing this and talking about having alternative energy, it's been mostly agreed upon with the applicant agreeing that they would agree to go towards a more renewable energy source. In this case, we don't have that applicant's affirmation on doing that. So that's where I would kind of be on the other side. I would like to see a move towards renewable energy and the 80%, but I can certainly understand, since this is a 1.0 and it can be fireproof, the generators, is that one of the conditions in this, I believe, right?
Through the chair, condition of approval, I'm seeing condition of approval number 21, which is to construct noise containment structures. Perhaps Ms. Ryan would correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not seeing anything relative to fire protection, so that could be added.
Okay. I would be agreeable to add that in, but not the 80% in 5 years. I would go maybe longer, more like 7 or 8 years in this consideration, since the applicant is not in agreement to say they would be wanting to convert in 5 years to 80% of renewable energy.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. So I mean, if I think we should have that motion, and if it fails, you can bring.
Right. I'm just stating my thoughts on this
Okay.
whole thing since I
agree.
had not spoken up yet.
All right. Any other discussion on this before I call for the vote? Seeing none, Laura, a roll call vote, please.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes?
Mike Newman,
No?
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Thomas Mulder,
No.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
All right. Motion carries 5-2. All right. Thank you, Laura. All right. So with that, we move on. That concludes our items that were pulled. We move on to old business. And the first item is, item number 1 is proposed communication facilities ordinance. So pick up where we left off last meeting.
Okay, wonderful. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Keenan.
Yes, thank you. Let me see here. Get the- Okay, so you're seeing the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So good evening, Commission. I'm Keenan Hilton, and I'm going to continue with the presentation of the draft telecommunications facilities ordinance. Since we saw kind of the long movie version last time late at night, I will try to keep it brief and get to kind of the discussion around it. Okay. So objectives this evening: complete the review, receive and discuss public comments, and recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors. Okay, roadmap of the presentation, a very brief recap of what we covered 2 weeks ago, and then a high-level review of the structure and approach of the draft ordinance. So first, the why. There's the local impetus, which is our general plan goals that we went over relating to improving the quality of life and all of the various doors that are opened by having fast, widely available broadband, and also the context of the fact that the ground has shifted beneath us in terms of some of the federal and state regulations. Second, in terms of the ground shifting, we're working kind of within a narrow band of control that we have. A lot of the regulatory arena is taken up by the federal and state agencies. We can incentivize certain designs and locations, though. Third, the current county regulations, there's confusion. It's not consistent. It's easiest currently in timberland production zone, and the timeframes and where it's allowed and where it's not, and what the permitting pathways are not aligned to allow us to meet some of the federal regulations, in particular the shot clocks. And so then our proposed approach in this draft ordinance, we propose tiers that allow us to align and kind of build into the structure of the ordinance incentives to optimize for co-location, for new small cell facilities. And the small cell, that's the small antenna that's about 3 cubic feet, and then making it an easier pathway in industrial and commercial zones. These are the different sections of the proposed ordinance. and I would be happy to go through any part with a fine-tooth comb. Tonight in the presentation, I'm just going to call your attention to the provisions in the two highlighted sections. Before getting to that, just a note on the coastal version. We have the inland version and the coastal version. The coastal version at this point basically exactly mirrors the inland, except for the fact that it does require a coastal development permit in every case. And that we would recommend that any motion include updating zoning references to coastal ordinance. There are slight differences. This is relevant in timber. There's a timber zone in coastal that doesn't exist in inland that we would want to reference. So we would recommend that any motion would include updating those zoning references in the language of the coastal ordinance. I mentioned last time that the aviation department was going to do some further research on potential conflicts and safety concerns with 5G, that's small cell, and airports. We did receive updated recommendations from aviation staff. So what you're looking at here is what's currently in the ordinance. And we have two alternatives included. One of them being the general statement that when the FAA has determined that it poses a hazard, you shall not install or operate antennas in those locations. And then something based on an earlier recommendation that they'd given us, shall not be installed or operated within 2 miles of an airport runway. Based on their revised comment to us, this is basically exactly lifted from the email I received from aviation staff. And it's new small cell and non-small cell shall not be installed and operated if the following conditions exist. And these are, these are requirements that, because the situation between the FCC and the FAA it's still somewhat fluid. It's in motion. And so this kind of allows for the fact that as the FAA develops more firm recommendations, then we'll be able to incorporate that into our the way that we administer the code. The way that we would incorporate this into application requirements, we're recommending that it be added to both the ministerial and the design review checklist. The language is exactly the same as for general provisions. And the design review checklist is a checklist that is points required for all types of discretionary projects, would have to complete that, so it would cover all projects. And also, 2 weeks ago, I called attention to this question of noticing, and in particular, bring your attention to the fact that for the discretionary permits, any person who specifically requested in writing can get a notice of a final action. This is relevant for the design review because the discretion in that case lies with the director. And unless there is some type of notice of application, neighbors wouldn't necessarily know that an application had been filed. So we currently don't have a requirement for a notice of application to be sent out. The county sending out notices of application can be, I mean, it costs money, and there are hard limits from the federal government on how much we can charge applicants for these. A solution that other jurisdictions have arrived at is requiring applicants themselves to send out notices to neighbors and people in the community. So an alternative for the commission to consider in this case would be requiring the applicant to provide evidence that they have sent out a notice of application. And that concludes my presentation. Again, happy to go through any part of the text of the ordinance, answer any questions. We recommend that you receive public testimony, deliberate and comment, and then recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors.
I just want to clarify the way I read through this. I don't believe it affects any existing facilities unless they were trying to do upgrades, but I was just trying to clarify that is correct or incorrect.
That's correct. This is not proposing to have any retroactive standards applied.
Okay, thank you. Then I can participate in this.
I have a question. Could you go over the tiers again a little bit? I know you went over them previously, but.
Yes, absolutely. Allow me to. Okay, seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So tier 1 is no public hearing required. And there are 2 parts of tier 1. The first is a zoning clearance certificate. And this is when it's principally permitted. And so what people are applying for is a building permit. And then if it's in the right of way, they would also be applying for an encroachment permit. And so this would only come to staff, to planning staff as a building referral. And we would require that people complete a checklist that makes sure that it meets all of the criteria of a zoning clearance certificate. It's a set of objective standards. And then if we can check all of the boxes, then we recommend approval on the building permit, and they get their zoning clearance. This has been specifically crafted to match federal requirements on certain types of projects. That it's called an eligible facility request, and it's when there are certain criteria met, we cannot deny it. And in fact, if they establish that they have done the things, then it is deemed granted. So we've accounted for that in our design of zoning clearance. And then outside of what we are required to do, and that's largely co-location, replacement, and decommissioning of facilities. We also have made this kind of the easiest pathway for projects in industrial and commercial zoning districts, and where we think that facilities would be least likely to have any adverse impacts. And then new small cell facilities, except in resource zone districts and residential zones. And then the other kind of bifurcated pathway within tier 1 is design review. So design review is discretionary, but there's no public hearing. The discretion lies with the director in this case. But it allows us to have, some degree of discretion when looking at a project, making sure that the design meets the standards. So in this case, new invisible, non-small, except in residential, ag, timberland production, and timber exclusive. New small cell in residential. We need to, and the reason for having that is that this is a pathway that will still allow us to process the application quite rapidly. but it's discretionary. So there's a little bit more leeway in our ability to, make a denial and findings for projects in residential if it doesn't meet the standards.
Keenan, can I ask a question on what you were just going through there? On Tier 1, because we're wanting to keep the watch or the stopwatch going because of the federal regulations, what would be considered invisible non-SCWF, which is small cell? I wanted to get that definition again. Definition is defined as mounted on structures 50 feet or less in height, including their antennas, is defined in a certain section. Mounted on structures no more than 10% taller than adjacent structures, and do not extend existing structures on which they were located to a height of more than 50 feet or more, less than 10%, which is ever greater. But this is invisible non-SCWF, except in residential. What would that be, for an example?
So non-small, and I know it's kind of a confusing thing, but since the FCC created this category of antenna, or this category of facility, the small facility, and they created all of these regulations for making these things just breeze through a regulatory process, we've decided non-small is everything else. So theoretically, this could be something that, maybe it's just over 50 feet, or this also captures the, 200-foot facility on the top of a hill. Non-small means everything else. But to your question about invisible facilities, here is the definition of invisible, which means that it cannot be seen from the street nor from any adjacent property. So, and there's no apparent architectural change. In this case,
what page is that on?
It's on page 21 of the packet.
Thank you.
And so the intent with the invisible facility is really that it's not detectable. The only people that would know that it's there are the people on that own that property.
Okay, so it's invisible to the public, is in other words.
Yeah,
okay.
It's invisible to the public.
All right, thank you.
And
hey, Keenan, would
Yes.
you just give a quick example of what an invisible facility would be, and why design approval is appropriate in those cases?
Sure. So invisible facility, you can imagine that like on a rooftop, let's say maybe the planning building, we have a 2-story building, that there could be a location where you could put an antenna on the top of the building that would not be visible from the street, nor from neighboring parcels, and yet it would provide a service to this location. Probably not a huge, it wouldn't be a big cell, but it would provide service. The reason why we would want design review is basically just to make sure that it is in fact invisible. Right, because that is something that I think staff wants to retain a little bit of judgment on.
And I noticed in the definition here, the addition of landscaping, walls, fences, et cetera, grading as screening techniques does not meet that definition of invisible.
Yeah. So again, this is of course any piece. If you would like to, your commission can change it. But we decided to at least right now propose a conservative definition, and that's just saying that theoretically we don't want someone to be able to, or we are proposing that someone would not be able to say just add a big wall on a facade that might not actually fit in, but because it hides the antenna, it would technically be invisible. That we're trying to avoid that situation in this case.
Great, thank you.
Great. And then co-locations that do not qualify for a zoning clearance certificate. And this is really due to just kind of a curious situation that's a conflict between state law and the federal law, which requires that if you have co-location on a facility that was approved ministerially, it has to be discretionary in the state of California. And so even though co-locations are something that make a lot of sense to me to include as being a ministerial process, in this one case, when you're co-locating on a ministerially approved facility, in the state of California, it has to be discretionary. And so this seems like the pathway that would be less friction, but still satisfying the law. So those are the instances of Tier 1, which is the easiest, most streamlined pathway. Tier 2, which is special permit required, this would be heard by the zoning administrator. And this is kind of a bucket that catches everything else. So we don't define the specific pieces of a facility that would make it qualify for Tier 2, whether it's just if it doesn't fit into Tier 1 or Tier 3, then it's Tier 2. And Tier 3 is for those projects that we think that there is a possibility for impacts. And so we are specifically calling them out as projects that need a conditional use permit and would be heard by the Planning Commission. And these are new non-small facilities in residential zoning districts, all small cell and non-small cell in agriculture exclusive, TPZ, and timber exclusive, except those that qualify for Tier 1, so which would be a co-location would be the easiest example. And then in any other zoning district, if it exceeds the height maximum, if it's high visibility, or if it's located on a ridgetop or hilltop. Those being cases that we think that more discretion would perhaps be a good part of the process. So that is the rundown of the tiers.
So one of the things that it sounds like to me with these tiers is that it gives an unfair advantage to people that already have communication and makes it more difficult for people that don't. And, we've just approved all these cannabis permits and people are out in areas that are TPZ and agriculture and they don't have communication. We have Native communities that live in areas that they've lived in forever and they literally don't have a phone. Landlines are not being put in anymore and they don't have landlines and their cell phones don't work. And it's a health and safety issue. And I think that in our policy that we should prioritize that everyone in our county should be able to communicate. I mean, if you know how much we use computers and iPads and cell phones, and if you don't have those abilities, it really impairs your ability to have good health care. I mean, everybody's doing telecommunication, kids are doing school online with the COVID. People have businesses at, cannabis businesses or whatever businesses, tribal businesses, and they need communication desperately. And I could tell you story after story of heartbreaking stories of what people have had to go to, the lengths they've had to go to when a family member doesn't have communication. And I think this policy sounds, regulatory, and it should be, but it also should strive to provide communication to every citizen in our county and not create a tier system that will make it more difficult. So maybe there needs to be a fourth tier, and that tier is for people who don't have communication and desperately need it, and how we're going to not expedite so much, but not put too many hindrances just because they live in a rural area or agricultural area or a TPZ area, it's not their fault that it was zoned around them. If they've been here from, time immemorial, they didn't ask for a TPZ zone to be wrapped around them. So, and if, you can't communicate with just one tower, you have to relay from several towers. And so there has to be something in here, I believe, that promotes that. I remember going to a communication conference, I think it was in Minnesota, and is that where that Jesse Ventura was the governor, and he got up and said he was dedicated to having everyone in his state have communication, irregardless of where they live. And I think our policy should have that flavor to it also.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Keenan. I have one question for you. It's based on something on page 16 of the staff report, just because I always learn a lot, especially on a complicated issue like this, from reviewing all the public comments. And I had reviewed the comments that are in the record from prior to the February 17th hearing. But the staff report has highlighted that there is one comment since the February 17th hearing, which is included in attachment 5, and you do have a sentence summarizing that comment, but I couldn't find the email. So I just wonder if you could tell me if you can identify that and tell me what page that is on so I could take a quick look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, let me take a look. So the comment that we're referencing is the one that's on page 161. That's from Thomas McMurray.
I see. Just that brief 3 lines at the top of that page.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Keenan? Go ahead, Thomas.
Because I keep hearing about the co-locations and stuff, so I just want to ask this question to clarify 100%, and it's more about the fire safe regulations from the people that I've talked to. If a current permitted facility tried to add another cell phone tower or co-location, would that then trigger this section, more specifically 91.2.8.3.6 in the fire hazards?
Hold on one second while I find that. Wait, so can you give me the code number?
91.2.8.3.6, it's the fire hazards ones.
Okay. So, I mean, it depends. Most co-locations would fall under tier 1, and that section 91.2.8.3, those are applications for design review tier 2 and tier 3, so discretionary projects. So most co-locations would not have that requirement. But if it was one, like I mentioned before, that is a co-location on a previous ministerial approval, and therefore it needs to be a discretionary process for California state law, then we would need to make those findings. But I think that in light of the fact that it's a co-location, the difference that new project or that new facility on the original co-location, we would be looking at it as the project of adding the new facility, not looking at the original facility that's already there, if that makes sense. Sorry if that was jumbled.
Made sense to me, thank you.
Noah, you had another question.
Okay, thanks again. Keenan, one other question for you. In your presentation, you highlighted the issue of noticing, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You're basically, as as I heard you, you're saying that in the regulation as drafted before us, there is not a requirement on either the county or the applicant to notice the neighbors, but you identified that as an issue we might want to consider, and you proposed an alternative that I think I heard you say that some other jurisdictions have a requirement that the applicant pay for noticing of neighbors within a certain radius of the project. First of all, is that correct, what I'm recalling you said? And second of all, can you give us any more guidance about how often that requirement, how often you've seen that in other jurisdictions that applicants pay for the noticing? Because this seems like a little bit of a dilemma to me. On the one hand, I definitely don't like to have something like this that can be controversial happening without notice to the neighbors. On the other hand, as Peggy has just highlighted before, we have a real need to get telecommunication facilities in place where they are most needed. And I would hate to put this noticing cost or requirement as a further impediment that might discourage applicants from doing it. So any more clarity you can give us on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Certainly. Yeah, I think that was a pretty good summary. You know, to be clear, it wouldn't be us charging the applicant to do the noticing. One of the requirements, I mean, at least this applies to small cell, which I think would I don't know, that's one that could potentially generate some community concern in residential areas, which that's where there's design review for small cell in the current draft. But the FCC has put an upper limit on what local jurisdictions can charge for the review of an application. I can't recall off the top of my head. So this is not, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I feel like it might be $500, and that's for the whole process. So I think that would be for a small cell public works review and planning review. And so it's just not really enough money to pay for the noticing, as I understand it. And so we have not in the past, at least in inland areas, had applicants do their own noticing. I think that is something that's done in the coastal area. Michael or John can chime in on that. But that's the one solution that other jurisdictions have arrived at to provide for that notice and ability to file an appeal during the designated appeal period.
So Keenan, how many different ordinances did you look at, and how many of those had the responsibility of the applicant to do the noticing? Off the top of my head, there's only one that I'm remembering really specifically. I think that I saw it in others, but if that was a point of concern, I would have to look back to see how many others it was in.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Hi, Keenan. I have a question related to this discussion. I know that at the local schools, the parents receive a packet, and in that packet, there are several notices that the parent can check if they wish to receive information on, for example, herbicides or a number of different things. And I'm wondering, are there plans to include this should, for example, a school host one of these in that packet where it, similarly to what you have proposed, the onus is on the parent to request the information, but they have the opportunity to do so in advance?
Yeah, so there are no special provisions proposed for schools in the ordinance as it's currently drafted. I think that with small cell, one of the things that we are kind of the scope of our review is bound more or less by aesthetics. And so, again, I don't know exactly what the scope of the concern is. And I do recognize that within the community, there is, health concern. It's not something that's within the jurisdiction of the county, though. It is specifically within the jurisdiction of the FCC. So, there could be something that we would add in for the notice of application, but it kind of runs into the same question as the design review and what the mechanics of the noticing is going to be, in my mind.
Okay. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions for staff before we open this up for public comment? All right, with that, I will open up the public comment, and the first caller is 5288.
Ken Sawatsky, I strongly support you moving forward with this as quickly as we can, and I wish to thank John Ford for getting us to the position where we may get everything dealt with in some form or another on the agenda before 9 o'clock, if that be happening. So thank you very much for all of your participation. I'm done speaking now.
Thank you. Anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and bring it back to the commission. So any other questions, or anybody have any thoughts as to where they want to go with this?
Can we just run through the few that had options and vote on those few options and then pass it along to the Board of Supervisors?
We can do that.
I would just like to see something in the ordinance that is encouraging for those communities that lack communication, and there are some that have none. So that, we're talking, if you don't have a cell phone, you can't call 911, and that's, can be a real problem. So if there could be, it sounds like we're tearing towards supporting the people that already have communication and kind of leaving the rest of the people out there. And so if we could put something in there that there's a priority of some sort given to those that lack communication altogether. And I drive around, towers don't bother me. I don't even know where they are at. I know there's one on this roof because we used it to relay, to try to get a T1 line upriver. But I don't even see them. But what I do notice is that when you don't have them, you can't use your phone, you can't use the internet. And coming from a community that had to rely on radio communication, and there was only 2 in the whole community, it's pretty scary. So I would like a plan that at least emphasizes in there somewhere that we support the processing of applications for those communities that have 0. It's one thing if you say, well, gee, I want high speed, and so I'm upgrading or whatever, but you can make towers look like trees, and maybe there's a set of plans or, concepts that you can say, well, if you do this, then you're okay, but if you want to do something different, then you have to bring it before this design review. But if you want to make it look like a tree and you're in the forest, then who cares? If it's serving a community that has no communication, we should be encouraging everyone in the county to have communication so that they can have businesses, so that they can call 911, so that they can talk to their doctor. Right now, that's, how you get most of your visits now is over the phone if you live in a rural area. So it's really been a problem where people have had to go to other areas just to call the doctor to have a visit. So we need to be supporting the communities that don't have communication so that they do have health and safety. You can't even look up your symptoms to see what you have if you don't have an iPad and an internet connection. And so we shouldn't make it seem like you're building a skyscraper. You're just building a tower that allows people to communicate in the modern world and be able to let someone know if there's a fire or someone ran off the road and needs, to be airlifted out without having to drive 10 miles to find somebody or go to the top of a hill because there's one place on the whole reservation where you can actually use a cell phone, you know, and people know where they are, and that's where they have to go. I mean, I've seen where, you know, a wife and two elderly couple, her husband has a heart attack, and she has to leave him so that she can drive to some place where they can call 911, and that's a real concern for us that live in areas that already have communication, and you've never lived in an area like that, maybe you don't understand, but even when, you know, Thomas was calling in, oftentimes he couldn't communicate very well because he's in a rural area, and I don't think we should be putting all these businesses out in the middle of nowhere if they don't have communication and internet so that they can do business, or call 911 if they need to. So I think in our plan, we need to emphasize that we're supportive of that and that we're not going to put a bunch of artificial impediments unless there's a federal law that we have to follow or a state law, that we should be encouraging communication towers in areas that lack communication.
I strongly support prioritizing areas of need.
All right. Director wanted to say something, and then Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would just like to say, Commissioner O'Neill, I think that one of the things that the staff has tried to do with the tiered approach is to make it as easy as possible to do what you're talking about in terms of helping people understand these are the preferred locations. If you can go here, far less review. Please look here first. But if you have to go to some of these other areas, it gets a little bit more, there's a little bit more discretion involved. And so perhaps it would help on top of this tiered approach within the purpose section to identify the county, in addition to the purpose intent, to provide a reasonable, uniform, comprehensive set of standards and procedures for deployment, construction, installation, co-location, modification, and so on, to provide service within Humboldt County, to add a sentence.
Has the county identified all of the areas that lack communication now? Do you have that zoned out?
So part of the thing is we don't have all the carriers' maps. We ask for those when people come in for the areas where they're asking for towers. But no, we do not have their coverage maps. And their coverage maps come in several different forms, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
There is, you know, outdoor coverage, there's mobile coverage, and then there's indoor coverage, which is the best. And so it varies greatly. And as you saw, when we were looking at those sites in the Arcata Bottoms, that even in Arcata Bottoms, there wasn't good indoor coverage in some places.
And maybe that's part of our plan, is that would be, you know, something you'd have to contract probably out, to determine areas and prioritize areas that do need communication. And maybe there is a set of rules for, you know, those areas that have nothing, so that it's more encouraging and less, you know, feeling like, okay, well, now you have to do more, and those people that already have communication get to do less. That's just my point, is that I understand if there's already communication, you want to add another tower and there's already 6 there, and, you know, maybe we don't need that 7th tower. But if you're in an area where there's 0 communication, then we should have a policy or a way to make that a priority, and not put additional impediments. And eventually work to the point where all areas of our community have basic communication. I mean, literally, there are areas that have no phones, no cell phones right now. And we have school that just got a phones a couple years ago, and it took me 20 years to get that done. You know, so, you know, when I called the state and said, we have a school that has no phone, they were going to shut it down, rather than, you know, what do you mean we have a school with no phones? Shut it down. And, you know, that's not what you want to do, and ship the kids out to some other location. So we need to encourage and have a policy that eventually, or embraces the idea that we want everyone to have communication, so that they can do their health, their safety, education, economic development. Those are things that are essential to a vibrant community, all require communication now more than they ever did. So
I would say we agree absolutely with that. That's really what this is attempting to do.
I just don't see the language that says that.
And that's
And
where
so-
I'm advocating that perhaps just a simple
Yeah.
statement within the purpose section that identifies that we want to facilitate, enhance provision of service within currently unserved and underserved areas.
Because if not, down the road, everyone forgets, just like the cannabis, and they go, get carried away, and we'll sit there and talk for hours about something and forget the purpose, because I've heard over and over again what people thought it was when they passed these ordinances and now what it really is. So I just feel like, the county taking a position that this is a priority to serve those areas, no one helped us. We had to go find all of the money and do all of the hard lifting, there was, just the way it is, But if the county was behind that and we're identifying that, I even had the county go against me, when I used to run the OES for the tribe, and the county would go against us when we wanted to get funding for towers. I was like, we're together, we're partners, so, and it was only one individual within the county. It wasn't the county position at all, but when I was trying to bring money to the county for towers, so somehow, and you guys can work on it, I don't even know what I would put in there if I had to write it up myself, but that it would be in there that is a priority, and that we won't put a lot of impediments, where all of a sudden you're spending more money than you need to get those towers, because the people that run the towers, they're not even gonna go to your area if it's too difficult. They don't want to go there in the first place because there's not enough money in it for them. So.
Thank you, Peggy. Mike? And then,
So I'm in a complete agreement with you, Commissioner O'Neill. I think it's important to make it a part in this, along with the statement in the purpose area, that we need to maybe modify possibly tier 3 to give a little bit more preference so that it brings down the cost and attracts the businesses to bring down the cost so that then they can go out into these unimproved areas that have very few cell towers. And that would help very many people that recreate in our area and drive and go places, and we have no cell service, for emergencies and stuff, but it's very important in those communities, of course. So I'm in agreement that maybe we could take a look at something in tier 3 that can drive down the costs and make it easier for those ones that need to be reviewed, that can be on a faster track because there is no other cell service in that area. To find the area, it would be with no cell service.
It's true. You get these tourists and they look at MapQuest and they end up on Bald Hills Road or something in the middle of the winter, and they don't know and they have no ability to call out. So their phones, when they're moving from tower to tower, they're actually paying for those tower costs because they're using their cell phones out there. And so that does encourage cell providers to be in those areas, like along the stretches there's stretches of 101 where there's no coverage right now.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, well, I think we're all in agreement, it sounds like, on this, but the problem is that we could preface this or add something in terms of social justice, in terms of allowing, or promoting access in areas of need. But the real issue here is the way that's written. We're requiring a conditional use permit in TPZ and AE, which goes directly against what we're trying to get at, which is to allow greater access in those exact areas. And presently, you don't need a discretionary permit in TPZ. But with this, we're actually making it worse for those areas of need by demanding that they now have a discretionary permit. And so I'm wondering, maybe staff could go through the rationale there in terms of balancing social justice with this new rule that really makes it very difficult to address the social injustices by demanding that there be a conditional use permit in TPZ where there wasn't one before.
Okay,
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, I'll give it a go. Yeah, Commissioner McCaver, and I mean all commissioners, Commissioner O'Neill, these are all, very good points. And to be clear, actually, I think it might be helpful to, this isn't, I don't think like the definitive map, but this was something that was included in the presentation I gave last week. This is in our general plan. This is the map of what we show of broadband speeds. And indeed, what you see is that there are much faster broadband speeds here in the Humboldt Bay area. And most of Humboldt County is, not well served. And something else to highlight is are those general plan policies, which I think I can get to here. Yeah, so deployment and availability, available to every resident, business, and institution. It's in our general plan. That's one of our goals. Broadband access that reliably connects us to national networks. New construction that's integrated into new buildings. And then, orderly planning. And so these goals that we're discussing are absolutely in line with what the general plan is going for. The point of tension is that when you look at the requirements and the intent of, take for instance, agriculture exclusive zone, when there was the update of AE to, I think, bring it into conformance with the general plan. Again, Michael and John can correct me if I'm not getting this exactly right, but it was explicitly said that there's going to be no net loss of ag, and cell towers went, I think, from being a ministerial to a conditional use type of project. And that was just several years ago, and that was a decision that was made by the counties. We want to keep this for ag uses. TPZ, Timberland Production Zone, we look at that and go, this is a zone that is specifically for producing timberland. And it is, of course, these are the sites that have disproportionate amounts of and concentrations of the county's natural resources. And are those locations, these are locations that may be more likely to have impacts on the environment. Because, when you add a facility, it's, of course, creating the clearing for it and doing the construction, but, it's also building the road that goes out to the site, that there are potentially impacts that it would be appropriate to have some analysis of. And so that, it is directly in tension with the desire to get as many cell towers as we can get to serve unserved and underserved communities. And so I think that our thinking was that requiring a conditional use permit, it is a more difficult process, but it's not a closed door. We're not saying you cannot put them out there. And if in fact it is in the purpose of the ordinance to say that we want them in these locations, it's just making sure that the application, of course, would be, and the plan for the development is appropriate in minimizing any potential environmental impacts. So that's the rationale and the thinking behind the approach in the proposed ordinance.
If I could add to that, Keenan, that was well done. Thank you. But there are also other social factors that, when you talk about a path of least resistance, one of the things that we've experienced, particularly around the Fieldbrook area, is that cell company came in, proposed a wireless telecom facility. The neighborhood went absolutely bonkers, opposed it vehemently. And so what did the cell provider do? they went 2 parcels over to a TPZ parcel and put a bigger tower in. And so then that was because public facilities are current, or at that time were allowed in TPZ. You know, there was nothing the neighborhood could do about that, and it was just kind of imposed on the neighborhood. And so there are environmental factors that Keenan explained very well, but then there are also social factors that exist because we do have interfaces between developed areas and TPZ land.
Yeah, it just seems in this case, you know, laying on this additional discretionary permit in TPZ, I mean, it's going to have the exact opposite effect of what we all just agreed we want, which is to improve access in our rural areas, including all of the cannabis farms and, you know, all of the tribal lands and all of those places. And so I'm wondering if maybe how the other commissioners feel about this. I mean, maybe we could take that part out. I mean, why are we laying on an additional use permit for those areas?
Well, I think we're making a discretionary action, as Mr. Hilton just said. You know, one of the primary reasons is because these are the most environmentally sensitive lands that we have. And so if they're ministerial, there is no environmental review. So you're not calculating the environmental cost of extending a road, extending utilities. Now, if one of the things the Planning Commission wants to recommend to the board in terms of social justice is to add a provision in there, except in unserved areas, or, you know, make a tier 2 or a tier 1 to address unserved areas, you know, that probably.
Well, and that's exactly
Yes.
what I was getting at, is trying to get those unserved areas to make it to where it's easy for communication towers to go in there, easier, without it being a breakneck hard thing to do to get those communications in.
Exactly, yeah.
Because broadband is important. We're in that era now where cell phones, everybody has a cell phone, pretty much everybody has a cell phone. I can't say everybody, okay, but pretty much. And it's necessary to have that communications available. So I would like to make it easier, and I believe
So-
most of us
Yeah.
do. So what do we need to put in there?
So before I kind of
Yeah.
get there,
Tier 1, I think.
one of the things I would advocate that you think about is, do you really want to make like a tower in TPZ ministerial so that there's no ability to do environmental review? Because if you're doing that, we're going to have to do that environmental review for the ordinance right now.
We do this for cannabis all the time, and I sit here and have to deal with the fact that you've done this countywide environmental. Why can't you do a countywide environmental for towers?
We can, but that's not the approach we were taking right now, but we certainly can.
And then you're identifying areas, like his map, I mean, when I looked at that map, it was the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots have a higher standard to get communication because they're in agriculture. I mean, even dairy farmers need computers to keep track of the butterfat in their cows, you know, and water flows on cannabis farms and all kinds of technology that you need. And you're in a rural area, ag area or a TPZ area. So if our priority was to get communication, so maybe there's a 1A and B, I don't know. And if there's a lot of community output, maybe it kicks it into the next, you know, another area, and you have a way of knowing when, okay, this one's different, okay? Because I know there's Red Mountain, I mean, we all know what went on up there. You know, there are areas, even in rural areas, where people do have issues that you need to address at another level, and you're going to have to figure out how to address that issue. But you're not going to have a whole lot of people complaining about communication when they have zero. You know, these families that you said complained, they probably had cell phones that worked. They just didn't want another tower. I don't know.
And the environmental impact is not going to be great if you do it in advance and you can pinpoint areas on the map
Where it's a
that
problem.
already have roads that won't have all of those environmental impacts.
Thomas, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. So for me, I'm also thinking about, there's a specific cell phone tower I can think of that's existing right now, and health and safety of neighboring property owners. You know, it happens to have petroleum products stored and doesn't have the necessary vehicle turnaround, but it's approved. So I'm actually comfortable with this tiered approach that's there. And I'm a little confused because we have a countywide ordinance. Cannabis was brought up, but we have a countywide EIR and the environmental stuff. But we have site specific when it comes to endangered species. So I don't know if I heard earlier that if it's for cell phone towers, the endangered species potential isn't an issue, or maybe I'm misunderstanding things. So I just want to clarify that there.
That'd be a question for the director or Keenan, so.
Well, I think our approach right now is to allow the ordinance to go through under an exemption with the understanding that the larger towers in more sensitive locations would require discretionary review. And so those would have potentially site-specific environmental analysis. It's really hard to anticipate where towers would be. And frankly, it's probably going to be hard to get away from site-specific environmental review at some point. And so that's why I'm just trying to caution. I do understand the desire to make it less of a cumbersome process. Got that. Want to work with you to accomplish that.
Very familiar with site-specific environmentals. That's all I've ever done until I got here, and we're doing cannabis, and they're not site-specific anymore. They're, countywide. You've already done it and identified where things are going to go and how many and all that. So I'm saying, why can't we do something similar? Although there could be situations where it doesn't fit, and you have to decide. But to just say TPZ and ag, that's, that's more too specific, I think. There could be other instances that trigger a higher level of review or design or approval than just those two things.
So my follow-up to that, I should have been more clarification. My question wasn't really necessarily for staff. What I was hearing a couple of commissioners, that environmental review wasn't as big of a deal if it was for a cell phone tower, and maybe I'm misunderstanding. So that's what I'm asking for clarification.
I'm wondering, since you've made you've made an exemption for timber and ag lands, can we make an exemption from the exemptions if it's in the purpose of providing, services to underserved communities, so that we don't just say, okay, TPZ, no review, and the only place they're going to build those towers is the TPZ that's right next to Eureka and right next to the big towns. They're not going to help the underserved communities. So I think that's their reasoning for stacking it that way. But if you say they can be in TPZ, as long as it looks like a tree, if it's serving an underserved or unserved community, and it can be in ag so long as is serving an unserved community.
So let us give some thought, if I can, Chair, to just think out loud for a minute, give some thought to whether or not there's performance criteria that we could add to it to minimize the environmental effects in unserved communities. I think that's something we could probably work on and bring back to the commission.
And there's always going to be that incident where it's, there's an environmental concern that has to be weighed, even if it's in an unserved, and somehow you have to figure out when that's triggered. If it's the community outpouring and everyone in the unserved area doesn't want communication, then I guess you don't give it to them. But, if the environmental issues are too great.
Well, I think we always want to give service to communities. And that's why I think, something Keenan said is really, really important is it's like the door is not closed. Nothing in this ordinance closes the door to putting a tower anyplace. It just has increasing level of discretionary review. And some places are just more sensitive, and that's what the ordinance is struggling to grapple with. That is really state-of-the-art regulatory design for telecommunications ordinances. And so this really takes a step forward because it really does establish, here is where the county wants you to go. If you go here, it's a sign off over the front counter. You get to talk to the planner at the front counter and get a signature. It's that simple. Most people would love that. And then as things get more complicated, the discretion increases.
Right, but we've just got done approving all of these people to have businesses in the rural unserved areas, and then there's also people that live there forever, so that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, you don't want to put people on a road that's terrible, that people fall off all the time. All you hear about is accidents in some of these areas, but they can't call 911. Oh, well, you know. It
So
doesn't, we're at odds here.
I absolutely understand the tension.
We can build a cannabis farm, but we can't let you put in a tower unless you go through all of these steps.
Well,
So-
but I would also say the way the ordinance is structured right now, even for Tier 3, we do not have the same performance standards for the towers that we do for the cannabis farms. And that is a distinct difference. The environmental review that was done imposed a lot of performance standards.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you've done an environmental review for all of those rural areas to allow all these businesses, but along with businesses come the need for communication and the need for, you know, people coming to those areas. This goes hand in hand with, if you have a business, you need basic communication also. And so maybe that should have been included in the environmental when you did it, but that's neither here or there. You'll figure it out and come back with something, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have a suggestion. Would it be feasible for staff to come back with something very specific? So I don't think any of us, and nor staff, wants to leave something open. You know, everything TPZ or everything AE, or, you know, excluding a particular zone. Perhaps, as Commissioner O'Neill has pointed out, staff has already done a lot of environmental review in the county, looking at sites, looking at roads, looking at, you know, all of the resources under CEQA. Perhaps staff could pinpoint areas that are unserved.
We don't
And-
have access to that information, Commissioner. We do not.
Okay. In that case, perhaps staff could come back with some particular places within rural Humboldt that would have the least environmental impact, because that shouldn't be difficult if most of those areas have already been assessed in other ways under other CEQA documents. And that way we would have something very specific to work with, where we could say, if you are proposing to put in a tower in one of these areas and they are unserved, then you could follow Tier 1.
We will see what we can do.
So, am I understanding that we're going to let you bring back this to us at, I'm assuming, a date uncertain, or at the next meeting?
Hey, Keenan, are you out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
So what do you think? You think April 4th is doable, or April 7th?
Let's aim for April 7th.
Okay.
All right. So do you need a motion on that, or just? Okay.
So moved.
So we have a motion.
Second.
So just
Oh,
for clarity,
okay,
this is
someone
a
else seconded.
motion and a second to continue this discussion to April 7th.
Yes. I was just going to confirm that, so. Brian was the first, Thomas was the second. All right. Any further discussion on that? Laura, a roll call vote, please.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
Alan Bongio,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Thomas Smolder,
Yes.
All right, motion carries unanimous. So we're at 9:20, and we have one last topic, and that is a staff report on Old Arcata Road project. Do you want to start it, Director?
Yes, please. I know there's people that are interested in this,
Okay.
and really our presentation tonight is not very long.
Okay, let's go.
There is a lot of public controversy from the Bayside community relative to the, primarily the roundabout at the intersection of Old Arcata Road and Jacoby Creek Road. And I want to share my screen, and most of the project, or a lot of the project, is within the city of Arcata. A portion of it is within the county's coastal jurisdiction. And so this is an overlay showing the Old Arcata Road, Jacoby Creek proposed intersection with the roundabout. And what you see right here is the city limit line according to the city of Arcata. This is a recent change, but that is the most recent information that we have from Arcata that was just given to us today. At this bright blue line here is the coastal zone boundary. And so the area basically between this line and the blue line is the county's coastal jurisdiction. And so that requires that a coastal development permit be processed by the county. That application has been filed by the city of Arcata. The city council for the city of Arcata certified the environmental impact report that was done for this project, and also approved the coastal development permit within the city. And so that has been completed. Now it is moving into the county's purview to review and approve the coastal development permit. I want to make something really clear, is that this area right along here is basically the property line, and everything to that side of it is existing county right-of-way. So this entire project occurs within existing right-of-way. We're really not at a place to provide an analysis tonight from the county's perspective. I think that the Public Works Department for the county has been in close coordination with the city of Arcata, and so that the design objectives have been reviewed by engineering staff. And now it's really a matter of looking at the factors that are related to coastal resources associated with the implementation of this particular project. I know there are public that want to speak to this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right. Any questions for staff on this before we open it up for public comment? Go ahead, Brian.
So when we go to issue our coastal development permit, what if we look at the environmental impact report and decide that one of the other alternatives is the least environmentally impactful, and it's different than what the city of Arcata has chosen? Then what would happen?
So the city of Arcata is the lead agency. If we believe that the environmental impact report for the city of Arcata is inadequate, we really need to take that up quickly, or we would have to find that their work is inadequate and prepare our own.
Well, I would say I have some concerns about the roundabout taking, where the roundabout is shown there now.
I would be really cautious tonight in terms of deliberating on this application, because
Okay.
the application's not in front of us. This is really an update about the process and the fact that it's coming before you, anything that you say tonight could prejudice a future fair hearing.
Okay, but we will get that chance.
Yes.
In the future. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Any idea when that will occur?
Given the fact that the application has just come in, it'll be some months down the road.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Would you recommend that we open this up for public then
Yeah,
tonight?
I think you should probably
Okay,
listen to the
that's what I
public
thought
concerns.
too. So I'm going to open this up for public hearing, and first caller is 5288.
This is Ken Sawatsky. I appreciate you at least getting a preview of this in advance so that you do have plenty of time to consider the concerns of the public, and they have times to present this to you in the future. Keeping this extremely brief, what it comes down to, in a lot of our opinion, is a difference between a city dictating what we consider kind of a city project that actually takes place in a rural area. And some people refer to what we have out there as sprawl, because we like to live in larger open areas and not be constricted with this. Alternative projects will include such things as maybe a dedicated area to memorialize the existing structures there, plus the old established area that we have. We're on an Indian village there, and it's a perfect place to not have something of this nature and keep a rural atmosphere in the county. That we have no problem with the city doing whatever they want. The rest of the project's great. It's needed. It has to do the thing. The roundabout seems to be kind of, I don't know, in the face of those who would like to keep more of a rural perspective. So there may be others who wish to speak. I will stop speaking at that point, and if they wish to speak, of course, they're welcome to. Appreciate the opportunity, John, and appreciate us getting to it, this meeting. So that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. Next caller is Sue Moore.
Yeah, I would really like to go back to 3 months ago when I brought this to the Planning Commission's attention. That was just when the City of Arcata were requested to recirculate the draft environmental impact report due to a wetlands issue. And I requested the county become more involved. I'm sorry, this project is not just about the boundary that is drawn around the roundabout. This extends up to Fairview. It's going to have an impact on traffic, going to have an impact on drainage, it's going to have an impact on the character of a neighborhood, and it has multiple unexamined impacts on safety for Bayside residents. And I think that this project, in terms of its implications for the Bayside community, are being downplayed by the language that's being used. And I think that this is too late. I raised the issue 3 months ago. The county's known for months that we have serious reservations about this project. And it is not just the boundary line. And I really wish that the boundary line on that map had been pointed out tonight to show that the impacts extend up to Fairview. They're cumulative, they'll affect people's houses, they affect the Bayside Community Hall, and they're going to damage the integrity of the entrance to Bayside. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller is 223. 2223.
Good evening. This is good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. This is Craig Johnson, and I own a home in that same community, and actually walked to that post office. And I completely agree with Sue Moore, and I stand with her comments, and this will greatly affect our community in that location. The roundabout should not be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who wishes to speak on this? Seeing none, I will close. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, so new practice. I will now close the public comment from Zoom, and I'm going to open up the public comment here in the chambers. Welcome.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for allowing me this time to.
Oh. Am I, okay. Yeah.
Is that good? You got it? Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. My name is Alice Finan, and I've been a Humboldt County resident since 1996. I am co-director and a teacher at Mistwood Educational Center. Our historic school building sits at the corner of Old Arcata and Jacoby Creek Road, directly across the street from the post office. I'm here tonight to bring your attention to a gross injustice against your county constituents and Humboldt community. As we all know, the City of Arcata voted to approve the installation of the Old Arcata Road Improvement Project, which includes the roundabout that we are talking about. No one that I have discussed this project with is against the implementation of safety measures like sidewalks and highly visible crosswalks. However, the majority of people are perplexed by the installation of yet another roundabout in a location where it is unnecessary. Unnecessary is how I would describe this part of the project, and unsafe. As a teacher and director, my #1 priority is to keep my students and staff safe. When I first learned of this project, it was requested that we all come together to create a community-driven plan. Since the area of impact is outside the City of Arcata's jurisdiction, it made sense to include all of the residents' feedback to design a plan meeting all of our needs. Now, we all know we can't make everybody happy all of the time, but this project has been pushed through by the city without taking into account the voices of county constituents because these voters do not live in Arcata. It has been pushed through by the city without taking into account the voices of teachers and staff at Mistwood, because even though we spend the majority of our waking hours striving to create a better and kinder environment, community, and world, we don't vote in Arcata. It's been pushed through by the city without taking into account the voices of our children. These children, who are fewer in population compared to that of the students at Jacoby Creek Elementary, have spent hours learning about the proposed plan. They've reviewed the plan's purpose, they've seen the design, they've walked the footprint of the plan with the City of Arcata's engineers. Thank you. They have written letters to the City of Arcata council member and now to you as well to voice their concerns. They've spoke out in meetings and they say too close. The roundabout is too close to our school. We've spent countless hours showing up at meetings, writing the council. We've had to hire attorneys. I'm asking you as co-director, teacher, and mother of a Mistwood student that you use your abilities to make this matter go to a public hearing so that all of your constituents can be heard. Please rectify the fact that your county constituents and our, be it small, but just as important school community that have not been heard due to the negligence of the City of Arcata to consider all the voices that are negatively impacted by this project. Thank you so much for your time.
Excuse me. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment, bring this back to the commission. So, any thoughts?
My thought is, thank you. I think we'll be looking at this, as the director said, in its entirety in the future here. And until then, we'll leave it at that at this point.
Okay.
Like to maybe understand why the city wants to put it there, if there's been some sort of report done that, you know, says they need it, because, I mean, roundabouts have a purpose and they can reduce fuel consumption in cars. There's a lot of advantages in certain areas. I'm not so sure this area, but as opposed to other projects that they might have. I'm not the city. I don't know what their priorities were, but I'd like to know.
I just saw Bob Bronkel has his hand up, so maybe he could answer that question So Bob, if you're there, go ahead.
I would offer that rather than getting too deep into the discussion tonight, if you give us the questions that you have when we come back, we will make sure to have answers for those. Because I don't want to open a public hearing that's not intended to be a public hearing.
I wasn't going to open public hearing, but I just thought Bob, since he raised his hand, might.
Sure,
But
go ahead.
But when do you want to? When are we going to bring it back? Is the question. So.
I believe
just
that we've put
in
it
the
into
future?
referrals right now, and so that's going to last about 3 weeks. And then we will write a staff report and schedule it, so it's going to be at least 2 months.
Okay. So write your questions down, so when we get to this issue before us again, we'll have questions for them. Well, director's saying not to go there, so
Well,
I'm.
I think the director is saying that he would like to have us put the questions out there so that then when it comes back, then those can be addressed along with the regular items for that. Is that correct, Director?
Thank you, Commissioner Newman. Yeah, that's exactly correct.
So I'm in agreement with Commissioner O'Neill about why. I want to know why it was brought forth and why it needs to go in there like this for our county constituents out there in Jacoby Creek.
I would like to add a question as to why we would take away the parking spaces for in a school and one of only 2 points of egress and ingress and egress for the school.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Noah.
Well, mine sort of goes back to a question and answer that happened earlier when Commissioner Mitchell asked, what if we were to say we prefer an alternative in the EIR that was, an alternative that doesn't have a roundabout. And your response, if I understood you, Director Ford, was we would need to make that determination very quickly. Maybe I misunderstood, but I guess I want to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity to provide timely input to the city, while we wait for this next hearing in a couple months.
Yeah, let me research that, but I think that the EIR has been certified. If we disagree with the certification of the EIR, we need to take a very quick action. We may be able to identify that we prefer an alternative identified in the EIR, not approve the project as it was approved by the city of Arcata.
But still depend on the same EIR using a different alternative.
Right.
Right, okay.
So I have a question for you then to add to the list is why, I understand that they were the lead agency, the city of Arcata, but why do they get to determine what happens on county property or on county jurisdiction area? Why? It would seem to me that this would have been a situation where there would have been more of a collaborative operation between, I would say, Public Works. It doesn't seem that way, but we haven't got everything.
So I do believe, and maybe this is a point that I would ask Mr. Bronco to step in, but I do believe there has been coordination. Arcata has not done this in a vacuum, and I do believe that we have absolutely been involved. And I'd ask Mr. Bronco to confirm that.
The city and the county have been closely working on this particular project. The county has been eyeing this intersection as well as the one at Freshwater Road as potential intersections for roundabouts to help improve traffic flows within the community as well as improve safety at the intersections for both vehicles and pedestrians.
Thank you. All right, so this will come back to us at some point. Anybody else want to add anything before we wrap it up?
I'll just say we'll try to get it here by the first meeting in May.
Great. Thank you. Well, we're at 9:39. Is there anything else that we want to bring up before we adjourn?
I just have a quick question. Is it, has it never been done that, for example, if the city of Arcata is working closely with Public Works in Humboldt County, for example, on a project that does overlap, does that not go to the Planning Commission, at least in terms of an informational session, for example, or, you know, while that collaboration and consultation is ongoing between the city and the county?
That's a good question. Sometimes there is consultation like that. I don't know that it's always well, it's not always the practice, clearly.
Well, anything else? Can I get a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, Laura, roll call vote.
Who was the first and second?
Mike and Brian. Or Mike.
No.
And Noah, excuse me.
Noah was the second.
Let's try and take a little bit more time on those motions.
No, this is it. Boom.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's got a cord going down to that black cord.
sorry, just give me a second. Well, yeah, and it's this guy I need to do it on.
It hasn't been that way. No, we've been doing it.
Because we're still doing a telephone.
Thomas Mulder,
Yes.
Peggy O'Neill,
Yes.
Melanie McCaver,
Yes.
Mike Newman,
Yes.
Brian Mitchell,
Yes.
Noah Levy,
Yes.
Alan Bongio.
Yes,
Thank you.
we are adjourned. Good night, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.